Droll Stories, collected from the Abbeys of Touraine, by Honor de Balzac, illustrated by Gustave Doré. Cover frontispieces, full page image, medium size, title page 13's full page image, medium size, contents, translators, preface. Volume I. Prologue. The Fair Imperia. The Venial Sin. How the good man Bryn took a wife, how the seneschal struggled with his wife's modesty, that which is only a venial sin, how and by whom the said child was procured, how the said love sin was repented of and led to great mourning. The king's sweetheart, the devil's heir, the merry jests of King Louis XI, the high constable's wife, the maid of Phyllis, the brothers in RMS, the vicar of Azela Rider. The Reproach. Epilogue. Volume 2. The Three Clerks of St. Nicholas. The Continence of King Francis I. The Merry Tattle of the Nuns of Poissy. How the Chateau d'Azay came to be built. The False Courtesan. The Danger of Being Too Innocent. The Dear Night of Love. The Sermon of the Merry Vicar of Moudon. The Succubus. Despair in Love. Volume 3. Perseverance in Love. Concerning a Provost WHO not recognize things. About the monk Commodore WHO was a glorious abbot of Turpin. Bertha the Penitent. How the pretty maid of Portillon convinced her judge. In which it is demonstrated that fortune is always feminine. Concerning a poor man WHO was called Le Vieux par Camins. ODD sayings of three pilgrims. Innocence. The Fair Imperia married. Translator's preface. When, in March 1832, the first volume of the now famous Constitute was published by Gosselin of Paris, Balzac, in a short preface, written in the publisher's name, replied to those attacks which he anticipated certain critics would make upon his hardy experiment. He claimed for his book the protection of all those to whom literature was dear, because it was a work of art, and a work of art, in the highest sense of the word, it undoubtedly is. Like Boccaccio, Rabelais, the Queen of Navarre, Ariosto, and Virgil, the great author of the human comedy has painted an epoch. In the fresh and wonderful language of the merry vicar of Moudon, he has given us a marvellous picture of French life and manners in the 16th century. The gallant knights and merry dames of that eventful period of French history stand out in bold relief upon his canvas. The background in these lifelike figures is, as it were, sketched upon the spot. After reading the Constitute, one could almost find one's way about the towns and villages of Touraine, unassisted by map or guide. Not only is this book a work of art from its historical information and topographical accuracy, its claims to that distinction rest upon a broader foundation. Written in the 19th century in imitation of the style of the 16th, it is a triumph of literary archaeology. It is a model of that which it professes to imitate, the production of a writer who, to accomplish it, must have been at once historian, linguist, philosopher, archaeologist, and anatomist, and each in no ordinary degree. In France, his work has long been regarded as a classic, as a faithful picture of the last days of the Moon Age, when kings and princesses, brave gentlemen and haughty ladies laughed openly at stories and jokes which are considered disgraceful by their more fastidious descendants. In England, the difficulties of the language employed, and the quaintness and peculiarity of its style, have placed it beyond the reach of all but those thoroughly acquainted with the French of the 16th century. Taking into consideration the vast amount of historical information enshrined in its pages, the archaeological value which it must always possess for the student, and the dramatic interest of its stories, the translator has thought that an English edition of Balzac's chef-d'œuvre would be acceptable to many. It has, of course, been impossible to reproduce in all its vigor and freshness the language of the original. Many of the quips and cranks and puns have been lost in the process of anglicizing. These unavoidable blemishes apart, the writer ventures to hope that he has treated this great masterpiece in a reverent spirit, touched it with no sacrilegious hand, but, on the contrary, given as close a translation as the dissimilarities of the two languages permit. With this idea, no attempt had been made to polish around many of the awkwardly constructed sentences which are characteristic of this volume. Rough, and occasionally obscure, they are far more in keeping with the spirit of the original than the polished periods of modern romance. Taking into consideration the many difficulties which he has had to overcome, and which those best acquainted with the French edition will best appreciate, the translator claims the indulgence of the critical reader for any shortcomings he may discover. The best plea that can be offered for such indulgence is the fact that, although Les Constitutes was completed and published in 1837, the present is the first English version ever brought before the public. London, January, 1874. Volume I. The first 10 tales. 19s. Full page image, medium size. Prologue. This is a book of the highest flavour, full of right hearty merriment, spiced to the palate of the illustrious and very precious tosspots and drinkers, to whom our worthy compatriot, Francois Rabelais, the eternal honour of Turin, addressed himself. Be it nevertheless understood, the author has no other desire than to be a good Turanian, and joyfully to chronicle the merry doings of the famous people of this sweet and productive land, more fertile in cuckolds, dandies and witty wags than any other, and which has furnished a good share of men of renown in France, as witness the departed courier of piquant memory, Verville, author of Monde de Parvenir, and others equally well known, among whom we will specially mention the Sieur Descartes, because he was a melancholy genius, and devoted himself more to brown studies than to drinks and dainties, a man of whom all the cooks and confectioners of Tours have a wise horror, whom they despise, and will not hear spoken of, and say, "Where does he live?" if his name is mentioned. Now this work is the production of the joyous leisure of good old monks, of whom there are many vestiges scattered about the country, at Grenadille Street, Sir, in the village of Saclay-az-Leride, at Malmstes, Verrets, Rochecoubon, and the certain storehouses of good stories, which storehouses are the upper stories of old canons and wise dames, who remember the good old days when they could enjoy a hearty laugh without looking to see if their hilarity disturbed the sit of your ruffle, as do the young women of the present day, who wish to take their pleasure gravely, a custom which suits our gay France as much as a water-jug would the head of a queen. Since laughter is a privilege granted to man alone, and he has sufficient causes for tears within his reach, without adding to them by books, I have considered it a thing most patriotic to publish a dram of merriment for these times, when weariness falls like a fine rain, wetting us, soaking into us, and dissolving those ancient customs which make the people to reap public amusement from the Republic. But of those old Pantagruelists who allowed God and the King to conduct their own affairs without putting their finger in the pie oftener than they could help, being content to look on and laugh, there are very few left. They are dying out day by day in such manner that I fear greatly to see these illustrious fragments of the ancient breviary spat upon, staled upon, set at naught, dishonoured, and blamed, the which I should be loath to see, since I have and bear great respect for the refuse of our Gallic antiquities. Bear in mind, also, ye wild critics, you scrapers up of words, harpies who mangle the intentions and inventions of everyone, that as children only do we laugh, and as we travel onward laughter sinks down and dies out, like the light of the oil-lit lamp. This signifies, that to laugh you must be innocent, and pure of heart, lacking which qualities you purse your lips, drop your jaws, and knit your brow, after the manner of men hiding vices and impurities. Take, then, this work as you would take a group of statue, certain features of which an artist could omit, and he would be the biggest of all big fools if he put sleeves upon them, seeing that these said works are not, any more than is this book, intended for nunneries. Nevertheless, I have taken care, much to my vexation, to weed from the manuscripts the old words, which, in spite of their age, were still strong, and which would have shocked the ears, astonished the eyes, reddened the cheeks, and sullied the lips of trousered maidens, and Madame Virtue with 3 lovers, for certain things must be done to suit the vices of the age, and a periphrase is much more agreeable than the word. Indeed, we are old, and find long trifles better than the short follies of our youth, because at that time our taste was better. Then spare me your slanders, and read this rather at night than in the daytime, and give it not to young maidens, if there be any, because this book is inflammable. I will now redo of myself. But I fear nothing from this book, since it is extracted from a high and splendid source, from which all that has issued has had a great success, as is amply proved by the royal orders of the Golden Fleece, of the Holy Ghost, of the Garter, of the Bath, and by many notable things which have been taken therefrom, under shelter of which I place myself. Now make ye merry, my hearties, and gaily read with ease of body and rest of reins, and may a cancer carry you if you disown me after having read me. These words are those of our good Master Rabelais, before whom we must also stand, hat in hand, in token of reverence and honour to him, Prince of all wisdom, and King of comedy. The Fair Imperia. The Archbishop of Bordeaux had added to his suite when going to the council at Constance quite a good-looking little priest of Touraine, whose ways and manner of speech was so charming that he passed for a son of La Soldie in the governor. The Archbishop of Tours had willingly given him to his confrère for his journey to the town, because it was usual for archbishops to make each other presents, they well knowing how sharp are the itchings of theological palms. Thus this young priest came to the council and was lodged in the establishment of his prelate, a man of good morals and great science. Philippe de Malher, as he was called, resolved to behave well and worthily to serve his protector, but he saw in this mysterious council many men leading a dissolute life and yet not making less, nay gaining more indulgences, gold crowns and benefices than all the other virtuous and well-behaved ones. Now during one night, dangerous to his virtue, the devil whispered into his ear that he should live more luxuriously, since every one sucked the breasts of our Holy Mother Church, and yet they were not drained, a miracle which proved beyond doubt the existence of God. And the priest of Touraine did not disappoint the devil. He promised to feast himself, to eat his belly full of roast meats and other German delicacies, when he could do so without paying for them, as he was poor. As he remained quite continent, in which he followed the example of the poor old archbishop who sent no longer because he was unable to, and passed for a saint, he had to suffer from intolerable desires followed by fits of melancholy, since there were so many sweet courtesans, well developed, but cold to the poor people who inhabited Constance, to enlighten the understanding of the fathers of the council. He was savage that he did not know how to make up to these gallant sirens, who snubbed cardinals, abbots, councillors, legates, bishops, princes and margraves just as if they have been penniless clerks. And in the evening, after prayers, he would practice speaking to them, teaching himself the breviary of love. He taught himself to answer all possible questions, but on the morrow, if by chance he met one of the aforesaid princesses dressed out, seated in a litter and escorted by her proud and well-armed pages, he remained open-mouthed, like a dog in the act of catching flies, at the sight of sweet countenance that so much inflamed him. The secretary of the mansion, a gentleman of Perigord, having clearly explained to him that the fathers, procurers, and auditors of the rota bought by certain presents, not relics or indulgences, but jewels and gold, the favour of being familiar with the best of these pampered cats who lived under the protection of the lords of the council, the poor Turanian, all simpleton and innocent as he was, treasured up under his mattress the money given him by the good archbishop for writings and copying, hoping one day to have enough just to see a cardinal's lady love, and trusting to God for the rest. He was hairless from top to toe and resembled a man about as much as a goat with a night-dress on resembles a young lady, but prompted by his desires he wandered in the evenings through the streets of Constance, careless of his life, and, at the risk of having his body halberded by the soldiers, he peeped at the cardinals entering the houses of their sweethearts. Then he saw the wax candles lighted in the houses, and suddenly the doors and the windows closed. Then he heard the blessed abbot saw others jumping about, drinking, enjoying themselves, love-making, singing Alleluia and applauding the music with which they were being regaled. The kitchen performed miracles, the offices said were fine rich pots full, the matins sweet little hams, the vespers luscious mouthful, and the lawyers delicate sweetmeats, and after their little carouses, these brave priests were silent, their pages diced upon the stairs, their mules stamped restively in the streets. Everything went well, but faith and religion was there. That is how it came to pass the good man Hess was burned. And the reason? He put his finger in the pie without being asked. Then why was he a Huguenot before the others? To return, however, to our sweet little Philippe, not unfrequently did he receive many a thump and hard blow, but the devil sustained him, inciting him to believe that sooner or later it would come to his turn to play the cardinal to some lovely dame. This ardent desire gave him the boldness of a stag in autumn, so much so that one evening he quietly tripped up the steps and into one of the first houses in Constance where often he had seen officers, seneschals, valets, and pages waiting with torches for their masters, dukes, kings, cardinals, and archbishops. "Ah," said he, "she must be very beautiful and amiable, this one." A soldier, well armed, allowed him to pass, believing him to belong to the suite of the Elector of Bavaria, who had just left, and that he was going to deliver a message on behalf of the above-mentioned nobleman. Philippe de Malles mounted the stairs as lightly as a greyhound in love, and was guided by a delectable odour of perfume to a certain chamber where, surrounded by her handmaidens, the lady of the house was divesting herself of her attire. He stood quite dumbfounded like a thief surprised by sergeants. The lady was without petticoat or headdress. The chambermaid and the servants, busy taking off her stockings and undressing her, so quickly and dexterously had her stripped, that the priest, overcome, gave vent to a long ah, which had the flavour of love about it. "What want you, little one?" said the lady to him. "To yield my soul to you," said he, flashing his eyes upon her. "You can come again tomorrow," said she, in order to be rid of him. To which Philippe replied, blushing, "I will not fail." Then she burst out laughing. Philippe, struck motionless, stood quite at his ease, letting wander over her his eyes that glowed and sparkled with the flame of love. What lovely thick hair hung upon her ivory white back, showing sweet white places, fair and shining between the many tresses. She had upon her snow-white brow a ruby circlet, less fertile in rays of fire than her black eyes, still moist with tears from her hearty laugh. She even threw her slipper of a statue gilded like a shrine, twisting herself about from very ribaldry, and allowed her barefoot, smaller than a swan's bill, to be seen. This evening she was in a good humour, otherwise she would have had the little shaven crop put out by the window without more ado than her first bishop. "He has fine eyes, madam," said one of her handmaids. Where does he comes from? Asked another. Poor child, cried Madame, his mother must be looking for him. Show him his way home. The Tauranian, still sensible, gave a movement of delight at the sight of the brocaded bed where the sweet form was about to repose. This glance, full of amorous intelligence, awoke the lady's fantasy, who, half laughing and half smitten, repeated tomorrow, and dismissed him with a gesture which the Pope John himself would have obeyed, especially as he was like a snail without a shell, since the council had just deprived him of the holy keys. Ah, madam, there is another vow of chastity changed into an amorous desire, said one of her women, and the chuckles commenced again thick as hail. Philippe went his way, bumping his head against a wall like a hooded rook as he was. So giddy had he become at the sight of this creature, even more enticing than a siren rising from the water. He noticed the animals carved over the door and returned to the house of the Archbishop with his head full of diabolical longings and his entrails sophisticated. Once in his little room he counted his coins all night long, but could make no more than 4 of them, and as that was all his treasure, he counted upon satisfying the fair one by giving her all he had in the world. "What is it ails you?" said the good Archbishop, uneasy at the groans and ohs of his clerk. "Ah, my lord," answered the poor priest, "I am wondering how it is that so light and sweet a woman can weigh so heavily upon my heart." "Which one?" said the Archbishop, putting down his breviary which he was reading for others, the good man. "Oh, Mother of God, you will scold me, I know, my good master, my protector, because I have seen the lady of the cardinal at the least, and I am weeping because I lack more than 1 crown to enable me to convert her." The Archbishop, knitting the circumflex accent that he had above his nose, said not a word. Then the very humble priest trembled in his skin to have confessed so much to his superior. But the holy man directly said to him, "She must be very dear, then." "Ah," said he, "she has swallowed many a mitre and stolen many a cross." "Well, Philippe, if thou will renounce her, I will present thee with 30 angels from the poor box." "Ah, my lord, I should be losing too much," replied the lad, emboldened by the treat he promised himself. "Ah, Philippe," said the good prelate, "thou wilt then go to the devil and displease God, like all our cardinals," and the master, with sorrow, began to pray Street Gatian, the patron saint of innocents, to save his servant. He made him kneel down beside him, telling him to recommend himself also to Saint Philippe. But the wretched priest implored the saint beneath his breath to prevent him from failing if on the morrow that the lady should receive him kindly and mercifully, and the good Archbishop, observing the fervour of his servant, cried out to him, "Courage, little one, and heaven will exorcise thee." On the morrow, while Monsieur was declaiming at the council against the shameless behaviour of the apostles of Christianity, Philippe de Malles spent his angels, acquired with so much labour, in perfumes, baths, fomentations, and other fooleries. He played the fop so well, one would have thought him the fancy cavalier of a gay lady. He wandered about the town in order to find the residence of his heart's queen, and when he asked the passers-by to whom belonged the aforesaid house, they laughed in his face, saying, "Whence comes this precious fellow that has not heard of La Belle Imperia?" He was very much afraid he and his angels were gone to the devil when he heard the name, and knew into what a nice mess he had voluntarily fallen. 31s. Full page image, medium size. Imperia was the most precious, the most fantastic girl in the world, although she passed for the most dazzling and the beautiful, and the one who best understood the art of bamboozling cardinals and softening the hardiest soldiers and oppressors of the people. She had brave captains, archers, and nobles, ready to serve her at every turn. She had only to breathe the word, and the business of anyone who had offended her was settled. A free fight only brought a smile to her lips, and often the sight of Baudricourt, one of the king's captains, would ask her if there were anyone he could kill for her that day, a little joke at the expense of the abbots. With the exception of the potentates among the high clergy with whom Madame Imperia managed to accommodate her little tempers, she ruled everyone with a high hand in virtue of her pretty babble and enchanting ways, which enthralled the most virtuous and the most unimpressionable. Thus she lived beloved and respected, quite as much as the real ladies and princesses, and was called Madame, concerning which the good Emperor Sigismund replied to a lady who complained of it to him, that they, the good ladies, might keep to their own proper way in holy virtues, and Madame Imperia to the sweet naughtiness of the goddess Venus. Christian words which shocked the good ladies, to their credit be it said. Philippe, then thinking over it in his mind, that which on the preceding evening he had seen with his eyes, doubted if more did not remain behind. Then was he sad, and without taking bite or sup, strolled about the town waiting the appointed hour, although he was well favoured and gallant enough to find others less difficult to overcome than was Madame Imperia. The night came, the little Touranian, exalted with pride, caparisoned with desire, and spurred by his Alacs and Alices which nearly choked him, glided like an eel into the domicile of the veritable queen of the council, for before her bowed humbly all the authority, science, and wisdom of Christianity. The major domo did not know him, and was going to bundle him out again, when one of the chamber women called him from the top of the stairs, Imbert, it is Madame's young fellow, and poor Philippe, blushing like a wedding night, ran up the stairs, shaking with happiness and delight. The servant took him by the hand and led into the chamber where sat Madame, lightly attired like a brave woman who awaits her conqueror. The dazzling Imperia was seated near a table covered with a shaggy cloth ornamented with gold, and with all the requisites for a dainty carouse. Flagons of wine, various drinking glasses, bottles of the hypocras, flasks full of good wine of Cyprus, pretty boxes full of spices, roast peacocks, green sauces, little salt hams, all that would gladden the eyes of the gallant if he had not so madly loved Madame Imperia. She saw well that the eyes of the young priest were all for her. Although accustomed to the curl-paper devotion of the churchman, she was well satisfied that she had made a conquest of the young priest who all day long had been in her head. The windows had been closed. Madame was decked out in a manner fit to do honours to a prince of the empire. Then the rogue, beatified by the holy beauty of Imperia, knew that emperor, burgraf, nay, even a cardinal about to be elected pope, would willingly for that night have changed places with him, a little priest who, beneath his gown, had only the devil and love. He put on a lordly air, and saluted her with a courtesy by no means ungraceful, and then the sweet lady said to him, regaling with a piercing glance, "Come and sit close to me, that I may see if you have altered since yesterday." "Oh, yes," said he. "And how?" said she. "Yesterday," replied the artful fellow, "I loved you, today we love each other, and from a poor sinner I have become richer than a king." "Oh, little one," cried she, merrily, "yes, you are indeed changed, for from a young priest I see well you have turned into an old devil." And side by side they sat down before a large fire, which helped to spread their ecstasy around. They remained always ready to begin eating, seeing that they only thought of gazing into each other's eyes, and never touched a dish. Just as they were beginning to feel comfortable and at their ease, there came a great noise at Madame's door, as if people were beating against it, and crying out. "Madame," cried the little servant hastily, "here's another of them." "Who is it?" cried she in a haughty manner, like a tyrant, savage at being interrupted. The Bishop of Coria wishes to speak with you. May the devil take him, said she, looking at Philippe gently. Madam, he has seen the light through the chinks, and is making a great noise. Tell him I have the fever, and you will be telling him no lie, for I am ill of this little priest who is torturing my brain. But just as she had finished speaking, and was pressing with devotion the hand of Philippe, who trembled in his skin, appeared the fat Bishop of Coria, indignant and angry. The officers followed him, bearing a trout canonically dressed, fresh from the Rhine, and shining in a golden platter, and spices contained in little ornamental boxes, and 1,000 dainties, such as liqueurs and jams, made by the holy nuns at his abbey. Ah, said he, with his deep voice, I haven't time to go to the devil, but you must give me a touch of him in advance, my little one. Your belly will one day make a nice sheath for a sword, replied she, knitting her brows above her eyes, which from being soft and gentle had become mischievous enough to make one tremble. And this little chorus singer is here to offer that, said the bishop, insolently turning his great rubicund face towards Philippe. Monseigneur, I'm here to confess, madam. Oh, do you not know the canons? To confess the ladies at this time of night is a right reserved to bishops, so take yourself off, go and herd with simple monks, and never come back here again under pain of excommunication. Do not move, cried the blushing Imperia, more lovely with passion than she was with love, because now she was possessed both with passion and love. Stop, my friend. Here you are in your own house. Then he knew that he was really loved by her. Is it not in the breviary, and an evangelical regulation, that you should be equal with God in the valley of Jehoshaphat? Asked she of the bishop. 'Tis an invention of the devil, who has adulterated the holy book, replied the great numbskull of a bishop in a hurry to fall to. Well then, be equal now before me, who am here below your goddess, replied Imperia, otherwise one of these days I will have you delicately strangled between the head and shoulders. I swear it by the power of my tonsure, which is as good as the Pope's. And wishing that the trout should be added to the feast as well as the sweets and other dainties, she added, cunningly, sit you down and drink with us. But the artful minx, being up to a trick or two, gave the little one a wink which told him plainly not to mind the German, whom she would soon find a means to be rid of. The servant maid seated the bishop at the table, and tucked him up, while Philippe, wild with rage that closed his mouth, because he saw his plans ending in smoke, gave the archbishop to more devils than ever were monks alive. Thus they got halfway through the repast, which the young priest had not yet touched, hungering only for Imperia, near whom he was already seated, but speaking that sweet language which the ladies so well understand, that has neither stops, commas, accents, letters, figures, characters, notes, nor images. The fat bishop, sensual and careful enough of the sleek, ecclesiastical garment of skin for which he was indebted to his late mother, allowed himself to be plentifully served with hippocras by the delicate hand of Madame, and it was just at his first hiccup that the sound of an approaching cavalcade was heard in the street. The number of horses, the ho of the pages, showed plainly that some great prince, hot with love, was about to arrive. In fact, a moment afterwards the Cardinal of Ragusa, against whom the servants of Imperia had not dared to bar the door, entered the room. At this terrible sight the poor courtesan and her young lover became ashamed and embarrassed, like fresh-caught lepers, for it would be tempting the devil to try and oust the cardinal, the more so as at that time it was not known who would be pope, 3 aspirants having resigned their hoods for the benefit of Christianity. The cardinal, who was a cunning Italian, long-bearded, a great sophist, and the life and soul of the council, guessed, by the feeblest exercise of the faculties of his understanding, the alpha and omega of the adventure. He only had to weigh in his mind one little thought before he knew how to proceed in order to be able to hypothecate his manly vigour. He arrived with the appetite of a hungry monk, and to obtain its satisfaction he was just the man to stab 2 monks and sell his bit of the true cross, which were wrong. "Hulloa, friend," said he to Philippe, calling him towards him. The Portoranian, more dead than alive, and expecting the devil was about to interfere seriously with his arrangements, rose and said, "What is it?" to the redoubtable cardinal. He, taking him by the arm, led him to the staircase, looked him in the white of the eye and said without any nonsense, "Vetridi, you are a nice little fellow, and I should not like to have to let your master know the weight of your carcass. My revenge might cause me certain pious expenses in my old age, so choose to espouse an abbé for the remainder of your days, or to marry Madame tonight and die tomorrow." The poor little Touranian in despair murmured, "May I come back when your passion is over?" The cardinal could scarcely keep his countenance, but he said sternly, "Choose the gallows or a mitre." "Ah," said the priest, maliciously, "a good fat abbé." Thereupon the cardinal went back into the room, opened an escritoire, and scribbled upon a piece of parchment an order to the envoy of France. "Monseigneur," said the Touranian to him while he was spelling out the order, "you will not get rid of the Bishop of Coyea so easily as you have got rid of me, for he has as many abbeys as the soldiers have drinking shops in the town. Besides, he is in the favour of his lord. Now I fancy to show you my gratitude for this so fine abbey I owe you good piece of advice. You know how fatal has been and how rapidly spread this terrible pestilence which has cruelly harassed Paris. Tell him that you have just left the bedside of your old friend the Archbishop of Bordeaux. Thus you will make him scatter away like straw before a whirlwind." "Oh, oh," cried the cardinal, "thou meritest more than an abbey. Vetridi, my young friend, here are 100 golden crowns for thy journey to the Abbey of Turpin, which I won yesterday at cards, and of which I make you a free gift." Hearing these words, and seeing Philippe de Malles disappear without giving her the amorous glances she expected, the beautiful Imperial, puffing like a dolphin, denounced all the cowardice of the priest. She was not then a sufficiently good Catholic to pardon her lover deceiving her, by not knowing how to die for her pleasure. Thus the death of Philippe was foreshadowed in the viper's glance she cast at him to insult him, which glance pleased the cardinal much, for the wily Italian saw he would soon get his abbey back again. The Touranian, heeding not the brewing storm, avoided it by walking out silently with his ears down, like a wet dog being kicked out of a church. Madame drew a sigh from her heart. She must have had her own ideas of humanity for the little value she held in it. The fire which possessed her had mounted to her head, and scintillated in rays about her, and there was good reason for it, for this was the first time that she had been humbugged by priest. Then the cardinal smiled, believing it was all to his advantage. Was not he a cunning fellow? Yes, he was the possessor of the red hat. My friend," said he to the bishop, "I congratulate myself on being in your company, and I am glad to have been able to get rid of that little wretch unworthy of Madame, the more so as if you had gone near him, my lovely and amiable creature, you would have perished miserably through the deed of a simple priest." "Ah, how?" "He is the secretary of the Archbishop of Bordeaux. The good man was seized this morning with the pestilence." The bishop opened his mouth wide enough to swallow a Dutch cheese. "How do you know that?" asked he. "Ah," said the cardinal, taking the good German's hand, "I have just administered to him, and consoled him. At this moment the holy man has a fair wind to waft him to paradise." The Bishop of Coyea demonstrated immediately how light fat men are, for when men are big-bellied, a merciful providence, in the consideration of their works, often makes their internal tubes as elastic as balloons. The aforesaid bishop sprang backwards with one bound, burst into a perspiration and coughed like a cow who finds feathers mixed with her hay. Then, becoming suddenly pale, he rushed down the stairs without even bidding Madame adieu. When the door had closed upon the bishop, and he was fairly in the street, the Cardinal of Ragusa began laughing fit to split his sides. "Ah, my fair one, am I not worthy to be Pope, and better than that, thy lover this evening?" But seeing Imperia thoughtful, he approached her to take her in his arms, and pet her after the usual fashion of cardinals, men who embrace better than all others, even the soldiers, because they are lazy, and do not spare their essential properties. "Ha," said she, drawing back, "you wish to cause my death, you ecclesiastical idiot. The principal thing for you is to enjoy yourself, my sweet carcass, a thing accessory. Your pleasure will be my death, and then you'll canonize me perhaps? Ah, you have the plague, and you would give it to me. Go somewhere else, you brainless priest. Ah, touch me not," said she, seeing him about to advance, "or I will stab you with this dagger." And the clever hussy drew from her armoire a little dagger, which she knew how to use with great skill when necessary. "But my little paradise, my sweet one," said the other, laughing, "don't you see the trick? Wasn't it necessary to get rid of that old bullock of Korea?" "Well then, if you love me, show it," replied she. "I desire that you leave me instantly. If you are touched with the disease, my death will not worry you. I know you well enough to know at what price you will put a moment of pleasure at your last hour. You would drown the earth. Ah, you have boasted of it when drunk. I love only myself, my treasures, and my health. Go, and if tomorrow your veins are not frozen by the disease, you can come again. Today, I hate you, good cardinal," said she, smiling. "Imperia," cried the cardinal on his knees, "my blessed Imperia, do not play with me thus." "No," said she, "I never play with blessed and sacred things." "Ah, ribald woman, I will excommunicate thee tomorrow. And now you are out of your cardinal sense. Imperia, cursed daughter of Satan. Oh, my little beauty, my love. Respect yourself more. Don't kneel to me, fie for shame. Wilt thou have a dispensation in articulo mortis? Wilt thou have my fortune, or better still, a bit of the veritable true cross ? Wilt thou? This evening, all the wealth of heaven above and earth beneath would not buy my heart," said she, laughing. "I should be the blackest of sinners, unworthy to receive the blessed sacrament if I had not my little caprices. I'll burn the house down. Sorceress, you have bewitched me. You shall perish at the stake. Listen to me, my love, my gentle dove. I promise you the best place in heaven. Eh? No. Death to you then, death to the sorceress. Oh, I will kill you, Monseigneur." And the cardinal foamed with rage. "You are making a fool of yourself," said she. "Go away, you'll tire yourself. I shall be Pope, and you shall pay for this. Then you are no longer disposed to obey me? What can I do this evening to please you? Get out." And she sprang lightly like a wagtail into her room, and locked herself in, leaving the cardinal to storm that he was obliged to go. When the fair Imperia found herself alone, seated before the fire, and without her little priest, she exclaimed, snapping angrily the gold links of her chain, "By the double triple horn on the devil, if the little one has made me have this row with the cardinal, and exposed me to the danger of being poisoned tomorrow, unless I pay him over to my heart's content, I will not die till I have seen him burned alive before my eyes. Ah," said she, weeping, this time real tears, "I lead a most unhappy life, and the little pleasure I have costs me the life of a dog. let alone my salvation." As she finished this jeremiad, wailing like a calf that is being slaughtered, she beheld the blushing face of the young priest, who had hidden himself, peeping at her from behind her large Venetian mirror. "Ah," said she, "thou art the most perfect monk that ever dwelt in this blessed and amorous town of Constance. Ah, ah! Come, my gentle cavalier, my dear boy, my little charm, my paradise of delectation, let me drink thine eyes, eat thee, kill thee with my love. Oh, my ever-flourishing, evergreen, sempiternal God, from a little monk I would make a king, emperor, pope, and happier than either. There, thou canst put anything to fire and sword, I am thine, and thou shalt see it well, for thou shalt be all a cardinal, even when to redden thy hood I shed all my heart's blood." And with her trembling hands all joyously she filled with Greek wine the golden cup, brought by the Bishop of Coimbra, and presented it to her sweetheart, whom she served upon her knee, she whose slipper princes found more to their taste than that of the Pope. But he gazed at her in silence, with his eyes so lustrous with love, that she said to him, trembling with joy, "Ah, be quiet, little one. Let us have supper." The venial sin. How the good man Brun took a wife. Messire Brun, he who completed the castle of Rochecorbon-les-Vouves, on the banks of the Loire, was a boisterous fellow in his youth. When quite little, he squeezed young ladies, turned the house out of windows, and played the devil with everything. When he was called upon to put his sire the Baron of Rochecorbon some few feet under the turf, then he was his own master, free to lead a life of wild dissipation, and indeed he worked very hard to get a surfeit of enjoyment. Now, by making his crown sweat and his goods scarce, draining his land, and a-bleeding his hogsheads, and regaling frail beauties, he found himself excommunicated from decent society, and had for his friends only the plunderers of towns and the Lombardians. But the usurers turned rough and bitter as chestnut husks, when he had no other security to give them than his said estate of Rochecorbon, since the Rupes Carbonaise was held from our Lord the King. Then Brun found himself just in the humour to give a blow here and there, to break a collarbone or two, and quarrel with everyone about trifles. Seeing which, the Abbot of Malmsted, his neighbour, and a man liberal with his advice, told him that it was an evident sign of lordly perfection, that he was walking in the right road, but if he would go and slaughter, to the great glory of God, the Mohammedans who defiled the Holy Land, it would be better still, and that he would undoubtedly return full of wealth and indulgences into Touraine, or into Paradise, whence all barons formerly came. The said Brun, admiring the great sense of the prelate, left the country equipped by the monastery, and blessed by the abbot, to the great delight of his friends and neighbours. Then he put to the sacking of many towns of Asia and Africa, and fell upon the infidels without giving them warning, burning the Saracens, the Greeks, the English, and others, caring little whether they were friends or enemies, or where they came from, since among his merits he had that of being in no way curious, and he never questioned them until after he had killed them. At this business, agreeable to God, to the king, and to himself, Brun gained renown as a good Christian and loyal knight, and enjoyed himself thoroughly in these lands beyond the seas, since he more willingly gave a crown to the girls than to the poor, although he met many more poor people than perfect maids, but like a good Touranian he made soup of anything. At length, when he was satiated with the Turks, relics, and other blessings of the Holy Land, Brun, to the great astonishment of the people of Vouvrillans, returned from the Crusades laden with crowns and precious stones, rather differently from some who, rich when they set out, came back heavy with leprosy, but light with gold. On his return from Tunis, our Lord, King Philippe, made him a count, and appointed him his seneschal in our country and that of Poitou. There he was greatly beloved and properly thought well of, since over and above his good qualities he founded the Church of the Constitute in the parish of Egraig Knowles, as the peace offering to heaven for the follies of his youth. Thus was he cardinally consigned to the good graces of the Church and of God. From a wicked youth and reckless man, he became a good, wise man, and discreet in his dissipations and pleasures, rarely was in anger, unless someone blasphemed God before him, the which he would not tolerate because he had blasphemed enough for every one in his wild youth. In short, he never quarrelled, because, being seneschal, people gave up to him instantly. It is true that he at that time beheld all his desires accomplished, the which would render even an imp of Satan calm and tranquil from his horns to his heels. And besides this he possessed a castle all jagged at the corners, and shaped and pointed like a Spanish doublet, situated upon a bank from which it was reflected in the Loire. In the rooms were royal tapestries, furniture, Saracen pomps, vanities, and inventions which were much admired by people of Tours, and even by the Archbishop and clerks of St. Martin, to whom he sent as a free gift a banner fringed with fine gold. In the neighbourhood of the said castle abounded fair domains, windmills, and forests, yielding a harvest of rents of all kinds, so that he was one of the strongest knights-bannerets of the province, and could easily have led to battle for our Lord the King 1,000 men. In his old days, if by chance his bailiff, a diligent man at hanging, brought before him a poor peasant suspected of some offence, he would say, smiling, "Let this one go, Breediff, he will count against those I inconsiderately slaughtered across the seas." Oftentimes, however, he would let them bravely hang on a chestnut tree or swing on his gallows, but this was solely that justice might be done, and that the custom should not lapse in his domain. Thus the people on his lands were good and orderly, like fresh veiled nuns, and peaceful since he protected them from the robbers and vagabonds whom he never spared, knowing by experience how much mischief is caused by these cursed beasts of prey. For the rest, most devout, finishing everything quickly, his prayers as well as good wine, he managed the processes after the Turkish fashion, having 1,000 little jokes ready for the losers, and dining with them to console them. He had all the people who had been hanged buried in consecrated ground like godly ones, some people thinking they had been sufficiently punished by having their breath stopped. He only persecuted the Jews now and then, and when they were glutted with usury and wealth, he let them gather their spoil as the bees do honey, saying that they were the best of tax-gatherers. And never did he despoil them save for the profit and use of the churchman, the king, the province, or himself. This jovial way gained for him the affection and esteem of every one, great and small. If he came back smiling from his judicial throne, the abbot of Malmsted, an old man like himself, would say, "Ho, ha, Messiah, there is some hanging on since you laugh thus." And when coming from Rochecorbon to Tours he passed on horseback along the Faubourg Street Simferon, the little girls would say, "Ah, this is the Justice Day, there is the good man Brun," and without being afraid they would look at him astride on a big white hack that he had brought back with him from the Levant. On the bridge the little boys would stop playing with the ball, and would call out, "Good day, Mr. Seneschal," and he would reply, jokingly, "Enjoy yourselves, my children, until you get whipped." Yes, Mr. Seneschal. Also he made the country so contented and so free from robbers that during the year of the great overflowing of the Loire there were only 22 malefactors hanged that winter, not counting a Jew burned in the commune of Châteauneuf for having stolen a consecrated wafer, or bought it, some said, for he was very rich. One day, in the following year about harvest time, or mowing time, as we say in Turin, there came Egyptians, Bohemians, and other wandering troops who stole the holy things from the church of St. Martin, and in the place an exact situation of Madame the Virgin, left by way of insult and mockery to our holy faith, an abandoned pretty little girl, about the age of an old dog, stark naked, an acrobat, and of Moorish descent like themselves. For this almost nameless crime it was equally decided by the king, people, and the churchmen that the Mooress, to pay for all, should be burned and cooked alive in the square near the fountain where the herb market is. Then the good man Brang clearly and dexterously demonstrated to the others that it would be a thing most profitable and pleasant to God to gain over this African soul to the true religion, and if the devil were lodged in this feminine body the faggots would be useless to burn him, as said the said order. To which the Archbishop sagely thought most canonical and conformable to Christian charity and the gospel. The ladies of the town and other persons of authority said loudly that they were cheated of a fine ceremony, since the Mooress was crying her eyes out in the jail and would certainly be converted to God in order to live as long as a crow, if she were allowed to do so. To which the seneschal replied that if the foreigner would wholly commit herself to the Christian religion there would be a gallant ceremony of another kind, and that he would undertake that it should be royally magnificent, because he would be her sponsor of the baptismal font, and that a virgin should be his partner in the affair in order the better to please the Almighty, while himself was reputed never to have lost the bloom or innocence, in fact to be a cockribbon. In our country of Touraine thus are called the young virgin men, unmarried or so esteemed to distinguish them from the husbands and the widowers, but the girls always pick them without the name, because they are more light-hearted and merry than those seasoned in marriage. The young Mooress did not hesitate between the flaming faggots and the baptismal water. She much preferred to be a Christian and live than be Egyptian and be burned, thus to escape a moment's baking. Her heart would burn unquenched through all her life, since for the greater surety of her religion she was placed in the convent of nuns near Chardoret, where she took the vow of sanctity. The said ceremony was concluded at the residence of the Archbishop, where on this occasion, in honour of the Saviour all men, the lords and ladies of Touraine hopped, skipped and danced, for in this country the people dance, skip, eat, flirt, have more feasts and make merrier than any in the whole world. The good old seneschal had taken for his associate the daughter of the Lord of Azela-Rydell, which afterwards became Azela-Bristol, the which lord being a crusader was left before Acre, a far distant town, in the hands of a Saracen who demanded a royal ransom for him because the said lord was of high position. The Lady of Azay having given his estate as security to the Lombards and extortioners in order to raise the sum, remained, without a penny in the world, awaiting her lord in a poor lodging in the town, without a carpet to sit upon, but proud as the Queen of Sheba and brave as a mastiff who defends the property of his master. Seeing this great distress, the seneschal went delicately to request this lady's daughter to be the godmother of the said Egyptian, in order that he might have the right of assisting the Lady of Azay. And, in fact, he kept a heavy chain of gold which he had preserved since the commencement of the taking of Cyprus, and the which he determined to clasp about the neck of his pretty associate, but he hung there at the same time his domain, and his white hairs, his money and his horses. In short, he placed there everything he possessed. Directly he had seen Blanche of Azay dancing a pavilion among the ladies of the Tours. Although the Moorish girl, making the most of her last day, had astonished the assembly by her twists, jumps, steps, springs, and elevations and artistic efforts, Blanche had the advantage of her, as everyone agreed, so virginally and delicately did she dance. Now Brun, admiring this gentle maiden whose toes seemed to fear the boards, and who amused herself so innocently for her 17 years like a grasshopper trying her first note, was seized with an old man's desire, a desire apoplectic and vigorous from weakness, which heated him from the sole of foot to the nape of his neck, for his head had too much snow on the top of it to let love lodge there. Then the good man perceived that he needed a wife in his manner, and it appeared more lonely to him than it was. and what then was a castle without a chatelaine? As well have a clapper without its bell. In short, a wife was the only thing that he had to desire, so he wished to have one promptly, seeing that if the Lady of As-A made him wait, he had just time to pass out of this world into the other. But during the baptismal entertainment, he thought little of his severe wounds, and still less of the 8 years that had stripped his head. He found his eyes clear enough to see distinctly his young companion, who, following the injunctions of the Lady of As-A, regaled him well with glance and gesture, believing there could be no danger near so old a fellow, in such wise that Blanche, naive and nice as she was in contradistinction to the girls of Turin, who are as wide awake as a spring morning, permitted the good man first to kiss her hand, and afterwards her neck, rather low down, at least so said the Archbishop who married them the week after, and that was a beautiful bridal, and a still more beautiful bride. The said Blanche was slender and graceful as no other girl, and still better than that, more maidenly than ever maiden was, a maiden all ignorant of love, who knew not why or what it was, a maiden who wondered why certain people lingered in their beds, a maiden who believed that children were found in parsley beds. Her mother had thus reared her in innocence, without even allowing her to consider, trifle as it was, how she sucked in her soup between her teeth. Thus she was a sweet flower, and intact, joyous and innocent, an angel, who needed but the wings to fly away to paradise. When she left the poor lodging of her weeping mother to consummate her betrothal at the Cathedral of Streetgation and St. Maurice, the country people came to a feast their eyes upon the bride, and on the carpets which were laid down all along the Rue de la Sellerie, and all said that never had tinier feet pressed the ground of Turin, prettier eyes gazed up to heaven, or a more splendid festival adorned the streets with carpets and with flowers. The young girls of St. Martin and of the boroughs of Chateauneuf all envied the long brown dresses with which doubtless Blanche had fished for account, but much more did they desire the gold-embroidered dress, the foreign stones, the white diamonds, and the chains with which the little darling played, and which bound her forever to the said seneschal. The old soldier was so merry by her side, that his happiness showed itself in his wrinkles, his looks, and his movements. Although he was hardly as straight as a billhook, he held himself so by the side of Blanche, that one would have taken him for a soldier on parade receiving his officer, and he placed his hands on his diaphragm like a man whose pleasure stifles and troubles him. Delighted with the sound of the swinging bells, the procession, the pomps, and the vanities of the said marriage, which was talked of long after the episcopal rejoicings, the women desired a harvest of Moorish girls, a deluge of old seneschals, and baskets full of Egyptian baptisms. But this was the only one that ever happened in Turin, seeing that the country is far from Egypt and from Bohemia. The Lady of As-A received a large sum of money after the ceremony, which enabled her to start immediately for Acre to go to her spouse, accompanied by the lieutenant and soldiers of the Count of Rochecorbon, who furnished them with everything necessary. She set out on the day of the wedding, after having placed her daughter in the hands of the seneschal, enjoining him to treat her well, and later on she returned with the Sire As-A, who was leprous, and she cured him, tending him herself, running the risk of being contaminated, the which was greatly admired. The marriage ceremony finished and at an end, for it lasted 3 days, to the great contentment of the people. Messire Brun with great pomp led the little one to his castle, and, according to the custom of husbands, had her put solemnly to bed in his couch, which was blessed by the abbot of Malmsted, then came and placed himself beside her in the great feudal chamber of Rochecorbon, which had been hung with green brocade and ribbon of golden wire. When old Brun, perfumed all over, found himself side by side with his pretty wife, he kissed her first upon the forehead, and then upon the little round, white breast, on the same spot where she had allowed him to clasp the fastenings of the chain, but that was all. The old fellow had too great confidence in himself, in fancying himself able to accomplish more, so then he abstained from love in spite of the merry nuptial songs, the epithalamiums and jokes which were going on in the rooms beneath where the dancing was still kept up. He refreshed himself with a drink of the marriage beverage, which according to custom, had been blessed and placed near them in a golden cup. The spices warmed his stomach well enough, but not the heart of his dead darder. Blanche was not at all astonished at the demeanour of her spouse, because she was a virgin in mind, and in marriage she saw only that which is visible to the eyes of young girls, namely dresses, banquets, horses, to be a lady and mistress, to have a country seat, to amuse oneself and give orders. So, like the child that she was, she played with the gold tassels on the bed, and marvelled at the richness of the shrine in which her innocence should be interred. Feeling, a little later in the day, his culpability, and relying on the future, which, however, would spoil a little every day that with which he pretended to regale his wife, the seneschal tried to substitute the word for the deed. So he entertained his wife in various ways, promised her the keys of his sideboards, his granaries and chests, the perfect government of his houses and domains without any control, hanging round her neck the other half of the loaf, which is the popular saying in Turin. She became like a young charger full of hay, found her good man the most gallant fellow in the world, and raising herself upon her pillow began to smile, and beheld with greater joy this beautiful green brocaded bed, where henceforward she would be permitted, without any sin, to sleep every night. Seeing she was getting playful, the cunning lord, who had not been used to maidens, but knew from experience the little tricks that women will practice, seeing that he had much associated with ladies of the town, feared those handy tricks, little kisses, and minor amusements of love which formerly he did not object to, but which at the present time would have found him cold as the abate of a pope. Then he drew back towards the end of the bed, afraid of his happiness, and said to his too delectable spouse, "Well, darling, you are a seneschal's wife now, and very well seneschaled as well." "Oh, no," said she. "How no?" replied he in great fear. "Are you not a wife?" "No," said she, "nor shall I be till I have had a child." "Did you while coming here see the meadows?" began again the old fellow. "Yes," said she. "Well, they are yours." "Oh, oh," replied she laughing, "I shall amuse myself much the catching butterflies." "That's a good girl," says her lord. "And the woods?" "Ah, I should not like to be there alone, you will take me there." "But," said she, "give me a little of that liquor which Laponneuse has taken such pains to prepare for us." "And why, my darling? It would put fire in your body." "Oh, that's what I should like," said she, biting her lip with vexation, "because I desire to give you a child as soon as possible, and I'm sure that liquor is good for the purpose." "Ah, my little one," said the seneschal, knowing by this that Blanche was a virgin from head to foot, "the good will of God is necessary for this business, and women must be in a state of harvest." "And when should I be in a state of harvest?" asked she, smiling. "When nature so wills it," said he, trying to laugh. "What is it necessary to do for this?" replied she. "Ah, a cabalistical and alchemical operation which is very dangerous." "Ah," said she, with a dreamy look, "that's the reason why my mother cried when thinking of the said metamorphosis, but Bertha de Brilly, who is so thankful for being made a wife, told me it was the easiest thing in the world." "That's according to the age," replied the old lord. "But did you see at the stable the beautiful white mare so much spoken of in Turin?" "Yes, she is very gentle and nice." "Well, I give her to you, and you can ride her as often as the fancy takes you. Oh, you are very kind, and they did not lie when they told me so. Here, continued he, sweetheart, the butler, the chaplain, the treasurer, the equerry, the farrier, the bailiff, even the sire de Montse, the young valet whose name is Gautier and bears my banner, with his men at arms, captains, followers, and beasts, all are yours, and will instantly obey your orders under pain of being incommoded with a hempen collar. But, replied she, this mysterious operation, cannot it be performed immediately? Oh, no, replied the seneschal, because it is necessary above all things that both the one and the other of us should be in the state of grace before God, otherwise we should have a bad child, full of sin, which is forbidden by the canons of the Church. This is the reason that there are so many incorrigible scapegraces in the world. Their parents have not wisely waited to have their souls pure, and have given wicked souls to their children. The beautiful and the virtuous come of immaculate fathers, that is why we cause our beds to be blessed, as the abbot of Malmsted has done this one. Have you not transgressed the ordinances of the Church? Oh, no, said she, quickly. I received before Mass absolution for all my faults and have remained since without committing the slightest sin. You are very perfect, said the cunning lord, and I am delighted to have you for a wife, but I have sworn like an infidel. Oh, and why? Because the dancing did not finish, and I could not have you to myself to bring you here and kiss you. Thereupon he gallantly took her hands and covered them with kisses, whispering to her little endearments and superficial words of affection which made her quite pleased and contented. Then, fatigued with the dance and all the ceremonies, she settled down to her slumbers, saying to the seneschal, I will take care tomorrow that you shall not sin, and she left the old man quite smitten with her white beauty, amorous of her delicate nature, and as embarrassed to know how he should be able to keep her in her innocence as to explain why oxen chew their food twice over. Although he did not augur to himself any good therefrom, it inflamed him so much to see the exquisite perfections of Blanche during her innocent and gentle sleep, that he resolved to preserve and defend this pretty jewel of love. With tears in his eyes he kissed her sweet golden dresses, the beautiful eyelids, and her ripe red mouth, and he did it softly for fear of waking her. There was all his fruition, the dumb delight which still inflamed his heart without in the least affecting Blanche. Then he deplored the snows of his leafless old age, the poor old man, that he saw clearly that God had amused himself by giving him nuts when his teeth were gone. How the seneschal struggled with his wife's modesty. During the first days of his marriage the seneschal imprinted many fibs to tell his wife, whose so estimable innocence he abused. Firstly, he found in his judicial functions good excuses for leaving her at times alone. Then he occupied himself with the peasants of the neighbourhood, and took them to dress the vines on his lands at Vouver, and at length pampered her up with 1,000 absurd tales. At one time he would say that lords did not behave like common people, that the children were only planted at certain celestial conjunctions ascertained by learned astrologers. At another that one should abstain from begetting children on feast days, because it was a great undertaking, as he observed the feasts like a man who wished to enter into paradise without consent. Sometimes he would pretend that if by chance the parents were not in the state of grace, the children commenced on the date of St. Clair would be blind, of Street Gatian had the gout, of Street Agnes was scald-headed, of Street Troch had the plague. Sometimes that those begotten in February were chilly, in March, too turbulent, in April, were worth nothing at all, and that handsome boys were conceived in May. In short, he wished his child to be perfect, to have his hair of 2 colours, and for this it was necessary that all the required conditions should be observed. At other times he would say to Blanche that the right of a man was to bestow a child upon his wife according to his sole and unique will, and that if she pretended to be a virtuous woman she should conform to the wishes of her husband. In fact, it was necessary to await the return of the Lady of Azay in order that she should assist at the confinement, from all of which Blanche concluded that the seneschal was annoyed by her requests, and was perhaps right, since he was old and full of experience. So she submitted herself and thought no more, except to herself, of this so much desired child. That is to say, she was always thinking of it, like a woman who has a desire in her head, without suspecting that she was behaving like a gay lady or a town walker running after her enjoyment. One evening, by accident, Bryn spoke of children, a discourse that he avoided as cats avoid water, but he was complaining of a boy condemned by him that morning for great misdeeds, saying for certain he was the offspring of people laden with mortal sins. "Alas," said Blanche, "if you will give me one, although you have not got absolution, I will correct so well that you will be pleased with him." Then the Count saw that his wife was bitten by a warm desire, and that it was time to dissipate her innocence in order to make himself master of it, to conquer it, to beat it, or to appease and extinguish it. "What, my dear, you wish to be a mother," said he. "You do not yet know the business of a wife. You are not accustomed to being mistress of the house." Oh, said she, "to be a perfect countess, and have in my loins a little count, must I play the great lady? I will do it, and thoroughly." Then Blanche, in order to obtain issue, began to hunt the fawns and stags, leaping the ditches, galloping upon her mare over valleys and mountain, through the woods and the fields, taking great delight in watching the falcons fly, in unherding them, and while hunting always carried them gracefully upon her little wrist, which was what the seneschal had desired. But in this pursuit, Blanche gained an appetite of nun and prelate, that is to say, wished to procreate, had her desires whetted, and could scarcely restrain her hunger, when on her return she gave play to her teeth. Now, by reason of reading the legends written by the way, and of separating by death the embraces of birds and wild beasts, she discovered a mystery of natural alchemy, while colouring her complexion, and superagitating her feeble imagination, which did little to pacify her warlike nature, and strongly tickled her desire, which laughed, played, and frisked unmistakably. The seneschal thought to disarm the rebellious virtue of his wife by making her scour the country, but his fraud turned out badly, for the unknown lust that circulated in the veins of Blanche emerged from these assaults more hardy than before, inviting jousts and tourneys as they herald the armed knight. The good lord saw then that he had grossly erred, and that he was now upon the horns of a dilemma. Also he no longer knew what course to adopt. The longer he left it, the more it would resist. From this combat, there must result one conquered and one contused, a diabolical contusion which he wished to keep distant from his physiognomy by God's help until after his death. The poor seneschal had already great trouble to follow his lady to the chase, without being dismounted. He sweated under the weight of his trappings, and almost expired in that pursuit wherein his frisky wife cheered her life and took great pleasure. Many times in the evening she wished to dance. Now the good man, swathed in his heavy clothing, found himself quite worn out with these exercises, in which he was constrained to participate either in giving her his hand, when she performed the vault of the Moorish girl, or in holding the lighted fagot for her, when she had a fancy to do the torchlight dance, and in spite of his sciaticas, accretions, and rheumatisms, he was obliged to smile and say to her some gentle words and gallantries after all the evolutions, mummeries, and comic pantomimes, which she indulged in to divert herself, for he loved her so madly that if she had asked him for an impossibility he would have sought one for her immediately. Nevertheless, One fine day he recognized the fact that his frame was in a state of too great debility to struggle with the vigorous nature of his wife, and humiliating himself before his wife's virtue, he resolved to let things take their course, relying a little upon the modesty, religion, and bashfulness of Blanche, but he always slept with one eye open, for he suspected that God had perhaps made virginities to be taken like partridges, to be spitted and roasted. One wet morning, when the weather was that in which the snails make their tracks, a melancholy time, and suitable to reverie, Blanche was in the house sitting in her chair in deep thought, because nothing produces more lively concoctions of the substantive essences, and no receipt, specific how filter is more penetrating, transpiercing or doubly transpiercing and titillating than the subtle warmth which simmers between the nap of the chair and a maiden sitting during certain weather. Now without knowing it the Countess was incommoded by her innocence, which gave more trouble than it was worth to her brain, and gnawed her all over. Then the good man, seriously grieved to see her languishing, wished to drive away the thoughts which were ultra-conjugal principles of love. "Whence comes your sadness, sweetheart?" said he. "From shame." "What then affronts you?" "The not being a good woman, because I am without a child, and you without lineage. Is one a lady without progeny? Nay. Look. All my neighbours have it, and I was married to have it, as you to give it to me. The nobles of Touraine are all amply furnished with children, and their wives give them lapfuls. You alone have none. They laugh at you there. What will become of your name and your fiefs and your seigneuries? A child is our natural company. It is a delight to us to make a fright of it, to fondle it, to swaddle it, to dress and undress it, to cuddle it, to sing it lullabies, to cradle it, to get it up, to put it to bed, and to nourish it, and I feel that if I had only the half of one, I would kiss it, swaddle it, and unharness it, and I would make it jump and crow all day long, as the other ladies do. Were it not that in giving them birth women die, and that for this you are still too delicate and too close in the bud, you would already be a mother," replied the seneschal, made giddy with the flow of words. "But will you buy one ready-made ? That will cost you neither pain nor labour." "But," said she, "I want the pain and labour, without which it will not be ours. I know very well it should be the fruit of my body, because at church they say that Jesus was the fruit of the Virgin's womb." "Very well, then pray God that it may be so," cried the seneschal, "and intercede with the Virgin of Knowles. Many a lady has conceived after the new vein. You must not fail to do one." 57s. Full-page image, medium size. Then the same day Blanche set out towards Notre Dame de Knowles, decked out like a queen riding her beautiful mare, having on her a robe of green velvet, laced down with fine gold lace, open at the breast, having sleeves of scarlet, little shoes and a high hat ornamented with precious stones, and a gold waistband that showed off her little waist, as slim as a pole. She wished to give her dress to Madame the Virgin, and in fact promised it to her, for the day of her churching. The Sire de Montsour galloped before her, his eye bright as that of a hawk, keeping the people back and guarding with his knights the security of the journey. Near Mamstes the seneschal, rendered sleepy by the heat, seeing it was the month of August, waggled about in his saddle, like a diadem upon the head of a cow, and seeing so frolicsome and so pretty a lady by the side of so old a fellow, a peasant girl, who was squatting near the trunk of a tree and drinking water out of her stone jug, inquired of a toothless old hag, who picked up a trifle by gleaning, if this princess was going to bury her dead. "Nay," said the old woman, "it is Our Lady of Rochecorbon, wife of the seneschal of Poitou-Touraine, in quest of a child." "Ah, ah," said the young girl, laughing like a fly. "Just be satisfied. Then pointing to the handsome knight who was at the head of the procession, "He who marches at the head would manage that. She would save the wax candles and the vow." "Ha! My little one," replied the hag, "I am rather surprised that she should go to Notre Dame de l'Aigle-Knowles, seeing that there are no handsome priests there. She might very well stop for a short time beneath the shadow of the belfry of Malmstes. She would soon be fertile. Those good fathers are so lively." "By a nun's oath," said a tramp walking up, "look, the Sire de Montceau is lively and delicate enough to open the lady's heart, the more so as he is well formed to do so." And all commenced to laugh. The Sire de Montceau wished to go to them and hang them in lime tree by the road as a punishment for their bad words, but Blanche cried out quickly, "Oh, sir, do not hang them yet. They have not said all they mean, and we shall see them on our return." She blushed, and the Sire de Montceau looked at her eagerly, as though to shoot into her the mystic comprehensions of love, but the clearing out of her intelligence had already been commenced by the sayings of the peasants which were fructifying in her understanding. Her innocence was like touchwood, there was only need for a word to inflame it. Thus Blanche perceived now the notable and physical differences between the qualities of her old husband and perfections of the said Gautier, a gentleman who was not over-affected with his 23 years, but held himself upright as a ninepin in the saddle, and as wide-awake as the matin chimes, while in contrast to him slept the seneschal. He had courage and dexterity there where his master failed. He was one of those smart fellows whom the jades would sooner wear at night than a leathern garment, because they then no longer fear the fleas. There are some who vituperate them, but no one should be blamed, because every one should sleep as he likes. So much did the seneschal's lady think, and so imperially well, that by the time she arrived at the bridge of Tours, she loved Gautier secretly, as a maiden loves, without suspecting that it is love. From that she became a proper woman, that is to say, she desired the good of others, the best that men have. She fell into a fit of lovesickness, going at the first jump to the depth of her misery, seeing that all is flame between the first coveting and the last desire, and she knew not how she then learned that by the eyes can flow in a subtle essence, causing such powerful corrosions in all the veins of the body, recesses of the heart, nerves of the members, roots of the hair, perspiration of the substance, limbo of the brain, orifices of the epidermis, windings of the pluck, tubes of the hypochondriac, and other channels which in her was suddenly dilated, heated, tickled, envenomed, clawed, harrowed, and disturbed, as if she had a basket full of needles in her inside. This was a maiden's desire, a well-conditioned desire, which troubled her sight to such a degree that she no longer saw her old spouse, but clearly the young Gautier, whose nature was as ample as the glorious chin of an abbot. When the good man entered Tours, the of the crowd woke him up, and he came with great pomp with his suite to the church of Notre Dame de l'Aigle-Knowles, formerly called La Grange, as if you said that which has the most merit. Blanche went into the chapel where children are asked to God and of the Virgin, and went there alone, as was the custom, always, however, in the presence of the seneschal, of his valets and the loiterers who remained outside the grille. When the countess saw the priest come who had charge of the masses said for children, and who received the said vows, she asked him if there were many barren women. To which the good priest replied, that he must not complain, and that the children were good revenue to the church. "And do you often see," said Blanche, "young women with such old husbands as my lord?" "Rarely," said he. "But have those obtained offspring?" "Always," replied the priest smiling. "And the others whose companions are not so old?" "Sometimes." Oh, said she, "there is more certainty than with one like the seneschal?" "To be sure," said the priest. "Why?" said she. "Madam," gravely replied priest, Before that age God alone interferes with the affair, after, it is the men. At this time it was a true thing that all the wisdom had gone to the clergy. Blanche made her vow, which was a very profitable one, seeing that her decorations were worth quite 2,000 gold crowns. "You are very joyful," said the old seneschal to her when on the home journey she made her mare prance, jump, and frisk. "Yes, yes," said she. "There is no longer any doubt about my having a child, because anyone can help me." The priest said, "I shall take Gautier." The seneschal wished to go and slay the monk, but he thought that was a crime which would cost him too much, and he resolved cunningly to arrange his vengeance with the help of the archbishop, and before the housetops of Rochecorbon came in sight he had ordered the Sire de Montsuet to seek a little retirement in his own country, which the young Gautier did, knowing the ways of the Lord. The seneschal put in the place of the said Gautier the son of the Sire de Jallanges, whose fief was held from Rochecorbon. He was a young boy named René, approaching 14 years, and he made him a page, awaiting the time when he should be old enough to be an equerry, and gave the command of his men to an old cripple, with whom he had knocked about a great deal in Palestine and other places. Thus the good man believed he would avoid the horn trappings of cuckoldom, and would still be able to girth, bridle, and curb the factious innocence of his wife, which struggled like a mule held by a rope. That which is only a venial sin. The Sunday following the arrival of René at the manor of Rochecorbon, Blanche went out hunting without her goodman, and when she was in the forest near Les Canques, saw a monk who appeared to be pushing a girl about more than was necessary, and spurred on her horse, saying to her people, "Ho there! Don't let him kill her." But when the seneschal's lady arrived close to them, she turned her horse's head quickly, and the sight she beheld prevented her from hunting. She came back pensive, and then the lantern of her intelligence opened, and received a bright light, which made 1,000 things clear, such as church and other pictures, fables, and lays of the troubadours, or the domestic arrangements of birds. Suddenly she discovered the sweet mystery of love written in all languages, even in that of the carps. Is it not silly thus to seal this science from maidens? Soon Blanche went to bed, and soon said she to the seneschal, "Brun, you have deceived me. You ought to behave as the monk of the Canques behaved to the girl." Old Brun suspected the adventure, and saw well that his evil hour was at hand. He regarded Blanche with too much fire in his eyes for the same ardour to be lowered down, and answered her softly, "Alas, sweetheart, in taking you for my wife I had more love than strength, and I have taken advantage of your clemency and virtue. The great sorrow of my life is to feel all my capability in my heart only. This sorrow hastens my death little by little, so that you will soon be free. Wait for my departure from this world. That is the sole request that he makes of you, he who is your master, and who could command you, but who wishes only to be your prime minister and slave. Do not betray the honor of my white hairs. Under these circumstances there have been lords who have slain their wives." "Alas, you will not kill me?" said she. "No," replied the old man, "I love thee too much, little one. Why, thou art the flower of my old age, the joy of my soul. Thou art my well-beloved daughter. The sight of thee does good to mine eyes, and from thee I could endure anything, be it a sorrow or a joy, provided that thou does not curse too much the poor Bren who has made thee a great lady, rich and honoured. Wilt thou not be a lovely widow? And thy happiness will soften the pangs of death." And he found in his dried-up eyes still one tear which trickled quite warm down his fur-comb-coloured face, and fell upon the hand of Blanche, who, grieved to behold this great love of her old spouse who would put himself under the ground to please her, said laughingly, "There, don't cry, I will wait." Thereupon the seneschal kissed her hands and regaled her with little endearments, saying with a voice quivering with emotion, "If you knew, Blanche my darling, how I devour thee in thy sleep with caresses, now here, now there." And the old ape patted her with his 2 hands, which were nothing but bones. And he continued, "I dared not waken the cat that would have strangled my happiness, since at this occupation of love I only embraced with my heart." "Ah," replied she, "you can fondle me thus even when my eyes are open, that has not the least effect upon me." At these words the poor seneschal, taking the little dagger which was on the table by the bed, gave it to her, saying with passion, "My darling, kill me, or let me believe that you love me a little." "Yes, yes," said she, quite frightened, "I will try to love you much." Behold how this young maiden had made itself master of this old man and subdued him, for in the name of the sweet face of Venus, Blanche, endowed with the natural artfulness of women, made her old Brun come and go like a miller's mule. "My good Brun, I want this. Brun, I want that. Go on, Brun. Brun. Brun." And always Brun in such a way that Brun was more worn out by the clemency of his wife than he would have been by her unkindness. She turned his brain wishing that everything should be in scarlet, making him turn everything topsy-turvy at the least movement of her eyebrow, and when she was sad the seneschal distracted, would say to everything from his judicial seat, "Hang him." Another would have died like a fly at this conflict with a maid's innocence. But Brun was of such an iron nature that it was difficult to finish him off. One evening that Blanche had turned the house upside down, upset the men and the beasts, and would by her aggravating humour have made the Eternal Father desperate, "He who has such an infinite treasure of patience since he endures us," she said to the seneschal while getting into bed, "My good Brun, I have low-down fancies that bite and prick me. Thence they rise into my heart, inflame my brain, incite me therein to evil deeds, and in the night I dream of the monk of the Conks." "My dear," replied the seneschal, "these are devilries and temptations against which the monks and nuns know how to defend themselves. If you will gain salvation, go and confess to the worthy abbot of Malmsted, our neighbour. He will advise you well and will wholly direct you in the good way." "Tomorrow I will go," said she. And indeed directly it was day, she trotted off to the monastery of the good brethren, who marvelled to see among them so pretty a laddie, committed more than one sin through her in the evening, and for the present led her with great ceremony to their reverend abbot. Blanche found the said good man in a private garden near the high rock under a flower arcade, and remained stricken with respect at the countenance of the holy man, although she was accustomed not to think much of grey hairs. "God preserve you, madam, what can you have to seek of one so near death, you so young?" "Your precious advice," said she, saluting him with a courtesy, "and if it will please you to guide so undutiful a sheep, I shall be well content to have so wise a confessor." "My daughter," answered the monk, with whom old Brun had arranged this hypocrisy and the part to play, "if I had not the chills of 100 winters upon this unthatched head, I should not dare to listen to your sins, but say on, if you enter paradise, it will be through me." Then the seneschal's wife set forth the small fry of her stock in hand, and when she was purged of her little iniquities, she came to the postscript of her confession. "Ah, my father," said she, "I must confess to you that I am daily exercised by the desire to have a child. Is it wrong?" "No," said the abbot. But she went on, "It is by nature commanded to my husband not to draw from his wealth to bring about his poverty, as the old women say by the way." "Then," replied the priest, "you must live virtuously and abstain from all thoughts of this kind." But I have heard it professed by the Lady of Jalanges, that it was not a sin when from it one derived neither profit nor pleasure. "There always is pleasure," said the abbot, but don't count upon the child as a prophet. Now fix this in your understanding, that it will always be a mortal sin before God and a crime before men to bring forth the child through the embraces of a man to whom one is not ecclesiastically married. Thus those women who offend against the holy laws of marriage suffer great penalties in the other world, are in the power of horrible monsters with sharp and tearing claws, who thrust them into flaming furnaces in remembrance of the fact that here below they have warmed their hearts a little more than was lawful. Thereupon Blanche scratched her ear, and having thought to herself for a little while, she said to the priest, "How then did the Virgin Mary?" "Ah," replied Abbot, "that it is a mystery." "And what is a mystery?" "The thing that cannot be explained, and which one ought to believe without inquiring into it." "Well then," said she, "cannot I perform a mystery?" "This one," said the abbot, "only happened once, because it was the Son of God." "Alas, my father, is it then the will of God that I should die, or that from wise and sound comprehension my brain should be turned? Of this there is a great danger. Now in me something moves and excites me, and I am no longer in my senses. I care for nothing, and to find a man I would leap the walls, dash over the fields without shame, and tear my things into tatters, only to see that which so much excited the monk of the Canks, and during these passions which work and prick my mind and body, there is neither God, devil, nor husband. I spring, I run, I smash up the wash-tubs, the pots, the farm implements, a fowl house, the household things, and everything, in a way that I cannot describe. But I dare not confess to you all my misdeeds, because speaking of them makes my mouth water, and the thing with which God curses me makes me itch dreadfully. If this folly bites and pricks me, and slays my virtue, will God, who has placed this great love in my body, condemn me to perdition?" At this question it was the priest who scratched his ear, quite dumbfounded by the lamentations, profound wisdom, controversies and intelligence that this virginity secreted. "My daughter," said he, "God has distinguished us from the beasts and made us a paradise to gain, and for this given us reason, which is a rudder to steer us against tempests and our ambitious desires, and there is a means of easing the imaginations of one's brain by fasting, excessive labours, and other virtues, and instead of the frisking and fretting like a child let loose from school, you should pray to the Virgin, sleep on a hard board, attend to your household duties, and never be idle. Ah, my father, when I am at church in my seat, I see neither the priest nor the altar, only the infant Jesus, who brings the thing into my head. But to finish, if my head is turned and my mind wanders, I am in the lime twigs of love." "If thus you were," said the abbot, imprudently, "you would be in the position of Saint Lidoia, who in a deep sleep one day, one leg here and one leg there, through the great heat and scantily attired, was approached by a young man full of mischief, who dexterously seduced her, and as of this trick the saint was thoroughly ignorant, and much surprised at being brought to bed, thinking that her unusual size was a serious malady, she did penance for it as of venial sin, as she had no pleasure in this wicked business, according to the statement of the wicked man, who said upon the scaffold where he was executed, that the saint had in no wise stirred. "Oh, my father," said she, "be sure that I should not stir more than she did." With this statement she went away prettily and gracefully, smiling and thinking how she could commit a venial sin. On her return from the great monastery, she saw in the courtyard of her castle the little Jalanges, who under the superintendence of an old groom was turning and wheeling about on a fine horse, bending with the movements of the animal, dismounting and mounting again with vaults and leaps most gracefully, and with lissome thighs, so pretty, so dexterous, so upright as to be indescribable, so much so, that he would have made the Queen Lucrece long for him, she who killed herself from having been contaminated against her will. Ah, said Blanche, if only this page were 15, I would go to sleep comfortably very near to him. Then, in spite of the too great youth of this charming servitor, during the collation and supper, she eyed frequently the black hair, the white skin, the grace of René, above all his eyes, where was an abundance of limpid warmth and a great fire of life, which he was afraid to shoot out, child that he was. Now in the evening, as the seneschal's wife sat thoughtfully in her chair in the corner of the fireplace, old Brun interrogated her as to her trouble. I am thinking, said she, that you must have fought the battles of love very early, to be thus completely broken up. Oh, smiled he, smiling like all old men questioned upon their amorous remembrances. At the age of 13.5 I had overcome the scruples of my mother's waiting woman. Blanche wished to hear nothing more, but believed the page René should be equally advanced, and she was quite joyous and practised little allurements on the good man, and wallowed silently in her desire, like a cake which is being floured. How and by whom the said child was procured. The seneschal's wife did not think long over the best way quickly to awaken the love of the page, and had soon discovered the natural ambuscade in the which the most wary are taken. This is how, at the warmest hour of the day, the good man took his siesta after the Saracen fashion, a habit in which he had never failed since his return from the Holy Land. During this time Blanche was alone in the grounds, where the women work at their minor occupations, such as broidering and stitching, and often remained in the rooms looking after the washing, putting the clothes tidy, or running about at will. Then she appointed this quiet hour to complete the education of the page, making him read books and say his prayers. Now on the morrow, when at the midday hour the seneschal slept, succumbing to the sun which warms with its most luminous rays the slopes of Rochecorbon, so much so that one is obliged to sleep, unless annoyed, upset, and continually roused by a devil of a young woman. Blanche then gracefully perched herself in the great seigneurial chair of her good man, which she did not find any too high, since she counted upon the chances of perspective. The cunning jade settled herself dexterously therein, like a swallow in its nest, and leaned her head maliciously upon her arm like a child that sleeps, but in making her preparations she opened fond eyes that smiled and winked in advance of the little secret thrills, sneezes, squints, and trances of the page who was about to lie at her feet, separated from her by the jump of an old flea. And in fact she advanced so much and so near the square of velvet where the poor child should kneel, whose life and soul she trifled with, that had he been a saint of stone, his glance would have been constrained to follow the flexuosities of the dress in order to admire and re-admire the perfections and beauties of the shapely leg, which moulded their white stocking of the seneschal's lady. Thus it was certain that a weak valet would be taken in the snare, wherein the most vigorous knight would willingly have succumbed. When she had turned, returned, placed and displaced her body, and found the situation in which the page would be most comfortable, she cried, gently, René. René, whom she knew well was in the guard-room, did not fail to run in and quickly thrust his brown head between the tapestries of the door. What do you please to wish? Said the page. And he held with great respect in his hand his shaggy scarlet cap, less red than his fresh dimpled cheeks. Come hither, replied she, under her breath, for the child attracted her so strongly that she was quite overcome. And forsooth there were no jewels so sparkling as the eyes of René, no vellum whiter than his skin, no woman more exquisite in shape, and so near to her desire, she found him still more sweetly formed, and was certain that the merry frolics of love would radiate well from this youth, the warm sun, the silence, etc. Read me the litanies of Madame the Virgin, said she to him, pushing an open book him on hip deux. "Let me see if you were well taught by your master." "Do you not think the Virgin beautiful?" asked she of him, smiling when he held the illuminated prayer book in which glowed the silver and gold. "It is a painting," replied he, timidly, and casting a little glance upon his so gracious mistress. "Read, read." Then René began to recite the so sweet and so mystic litanies, but you may imagine that the ora pro nobis of Blanche became still fainter and fainter, like the sound of the horn in the woodlands, and when the page went on, "Oh, Rose of mystery," the lady, who certainly heard distinctly, replied by a gentle sigh. Thereupon René suspected that his mistress slept. Then he commenced to cover her with his regard, admiring her at his leisure, and had then no wish to utter any anthem save the anthem of love. His happiness made his heart leap and bound into his throat. Thus, as was but natural, these two innocents burned one against the other, but if they could have foreseen, never would have intermingled. René feasted his eyes, planning in his mind 1,000 fruitions of love that brought the water into his mouth. In his ecstasy he let his book fall, which made him feel as sheepish as a monk surprised at a child's tricks, but also from that he knew that Blanche was sound asleep, for she did not stir, and the wily jade would not have opened her eyes even at the greatest dangers, and reckoned on something else falling as well as the book of prayer. There is no worse longing than the longing of a woman in certain condition. Now, the page noticed his lady's foot, which was delicately slippered in a little shoe of a delicate blue colour. She had angularly placed it on a footstool, since she was too high in the seneschal's chair. This foot was of narrow proportions, delicately curved, as broad as 2 fingers, and as long as a sparrow, tail included, small at the top, a true foot of delight, a virginal foot that merited a kiss as a robber does the gallows, a roguish foot, a foot wanton enough to damn an archangel, an ominous foot, a devilishly enticing foot, which gave one a desire to make 2 new ones just like it to perpetuate in this lower world the glorious works of God. The page was tempted to take the shoe from this persuasive foot. To accomplish this, his eyes glowing with the fire of his age, went swiftly, like the clapper of a bell, from this said foot of delectation to the sleeping countenance of his lady and mistress, listening to her slumber, drinking in her respiration again and again. It did not know where it would be sweetest to plant a kiss, whether on the ripe red lips of the seneschal's wife or on this speaking foot. At length, from respect or fear, or perhaps from great love, he chose the foot, and kissed it hastily, like a maiden who dares not. Then immediately he took up his book, feeling his red cheeks redder still, and exercised with his pleasure, he cried like a blind man, "Janua Coeli, gate of heaven." But Blanche did not move, making sure that the page would go from foot to knee, and thence to Janua Coeli, gate of heaven. She was greatly disappointed when the litanies finished without any other mischief, and René, believing he had had enough happiness for one day, ran out of the room quite lively, richer from this hearty kiss than a robber who has robbed the poor box. When the seneschal's lady was alone, she thought to herself that this page would be rather a long time at his task if he amused himself with the singing of the Magnificat at matins. Then she determined on the morrow to raise her foot a little, and then to bring to light those hidden beauties that are called perfect in Turin, because they take no hurt in the open air, and are always fresh. You can imagine that the page, burned by his desire and his imagination, heated by the day before, awaited impatiently the hour to read in this breviary of gallantry, and was called, and the conspiracy of the litanies commenced again, and Blanche did not fail to fall asleep. This time the said René fondled with his hand the pretty limb, and even ventured so far as to verify if the polished knee and its surroundings were satin. At this sight the poor child, armed against his desire, so great was his fear, dared only to make brief devotion and curt caresses, and although he kissed softly this fair surface, he remained bashful, the which, feeling by the same sense of her soul and the intelligence of her body, the seneschal's lady, who took great care not to move, called out to him, René, I am asleep. Hearing what he believed to be a stern reproach, the page frightened ran away, leaving the books, the task, and all. Thereupon, the seneschal's better half added this prayer to the litany, Holy Virgin, how difficult children are to make. At dinner her page perspired all down his back while waiting on his lady and her lord, but he was very much surprised when he received from Blanche the most shameless of all glances that ever woman cast, and very pleasant and powerful it was, seeing that it changed this child into a man of courage. Now, the same evening, Brun staying a little longer than was his custom in his own apartment, the page went in search of Blanche, and found her asleep, and made her dream a beautiful dream. He knocked off the chains that weighed so heavily upon her, and so plentifully bestowed upon her the sweets of love, that the surplus would have sufficed to render to others blessed with the joys of maternity. So then the minx, seizing the page by the head and squeezing him to her, cried out, "Oh, René, thou hast awakened me." And in fact there was no sleep could stand against it, and it is certain that saints must sleep very soundly. From this business, without any other mystery, and by a benign faculty which is the assisting principle of spouses, the sweet and graceful plumage, suitable to cuckolds, was placed upon the head of the good husband without his experiencing the slightest shock. After this sweet repast, the seneschal's lady took kindly to her siesta after the French fashion, while Brun took his according to the Saracen. But by the said siesta she learned how the good youth of the page had a better taste than that of the old seneschal, and at night she buried herself in the sheets far away from her husband, whom she found strong and stale. And from sleeping and waking up in the day, from taking siestas and saying litanies, the seneschal's wife felt growing within her that treasure for which she had so often and so ardently sighed, but now she liked more the commencement than the fructifying of it. You may be sure that René knew how to read, not only in books, but in the eyes of his sweet lady, for whom he would have leapt into a flaming bile, had it been her wish he should do so. When well and amply, more than 100 times, the train had been laid by them, the little lady became anxious about her soul and the future of her friend the page. Now one rainy day, as they were playing at touch-tag, like two children, innocent from head to foot, Blanche, who was always caught, said to him, "Come here, René, do you know that while I have only committed venial sins because I was asleep, you have committed mortal ones?" Madam," said he, "well then will God stow away all the damned if that is to sin." Blanche burst out laughing, and kissed his forehead. "Be quiet, you naughty boy, it is a question of paradise, and we must live it together if you wish always to be with me." "Oh, my paradise is here." "Leave off," said she. "You are a little wretch, a scapegrace who does not think of that which I love, yourself. You do not know that I am with child, and that in a little while I shall be no more able to conceal it than my nose. Now, what will the abbot say? What will my lord say? He will kill you if he puts himself in a passion. My advice is, little one, that you go to the abbot of Malmstes, confess your sins to him, asking him to see what had better be done concerning my seneschal." "Alas," said the artful page, "if I tell the secret of our joys, he will put his interdict upon our love." "Very likely," said she, "but thy happiness in the other world is a thing so precious to me." "Do you wish it, my darling?" "Yes," replied she rather faintly. "Well, I will go, but sleep again that I may bid you adieu." and the couple recited the litany of farewells as if they had both foreseen that their love must finish in its April, and on the morrow, more to save his dear lady than to save himself, and also to obey her, René de Jallanges set out towards the great monastery. How the said love-sin was repented of and led to great mourning. Good God! Cried the abbot, when the page had chanted the Kyrie eleison of his sweet sins, thou art the accomplice of a great felony, and thou hast betrayed thy Lord. Dost thou know, page of darkness, that for this thou wilt burn through all eternity? And dost thou know what it is to lose forever the heaven above for a perishable and changeful moment here below? Unhappy wretch! I see thee precipitated forever in the gulfs of hell unless thou payest to God in this world that which thou owest him for such offence. Thereupon the good old abbot, who was of that flesh of which saints are made, and who had great authority in the country of Turin, terrified the young man by a heap of representations, Christian discourses, remembrances of the commandments of the Church, and 1,000 eloquent things, as many as a devil could say in 6 weeks to seduce a maiden, but so many that René, who was in the loyal fervour of innocence, made his submission to the good abbot. The said abbot, wishing to make forever a good and virtuous man of this child, now in a fair way to be a wicked one, commanded him first to go and prostrate himself before his Lord, to confess his conduct to him, and then if he escaped from this confession, to depart instantly for the Crusades, and go straight to the Holy Land, where he should remain 15 years of the time appointed to give battle to the infidels. Alas, my reverend father, said he, quite unmoved, will 15 years be enough to acquit me of so much pleasure? Ah, if you knew, I have had joy enough for 1,000 years. God will be generous. Go, replied the old abbot, and sin no more. On this account, ego t'absolvo. Poor René returned thereupon with great contrition to the castle of Rochecorbon, and the first person he met was the seneschal, who was polishing up his arms, helmets, gauntlets, and other things. He was sitting on a great marble bench in the open air, and was amusing himself by making shine again the splendid trappings which brought back to him the merry pranks in the Holy Land, the good jokes, and the wenches, etc. When René fell upon his knees before him, the good Lord was much astonished. What is it? Said he. My lord, replied René, order these people to retire. Which the servants having done, the page confessed his fault, recounting how he had assailed his lady in her sleep, and that for certain he had made her a mother in imitation of the man and the saint, and came by order of the confessor to put himself at the disposition of the offended person. Having said which, René de Jallanges cast down his lovely eyes, which had produced all the mischief, and remained abashed, prostrate without fear, his arms hanging down, his head bare, awaiting his punishment, and humbling himself to God. The seneschal was not so white that he could not become whiter, and now he blanched like linen newly dried, remaining dumb with passion. And this old man, who had not in his veins the vital force to procreate a child, found in this moment of fury more vigour than was necessary to undo a man. He seized with his hairy right hand his heavy club, lifted it, brandished it and adjusted it so easily you could have thought it a bowl at a game of skittles, to bring it down upon the pale forehead of the said René, who, knowing that he was greatly in fault towards his lord, remained placid, and stretching his neck, thought that he was about to expiate his sin for his sweetheart in this world and in the other. But his fair youth, and all the natural seductions of this sweet crime, found grace before the tribunal of the heart of this old man, although Bren was still severe, and throwing his club away onto a dog who was catching beetles, he cried out, "May 1,000,000,000 claws, dear during all eternity, all the entrails of him, who made him, who planted the oak, that made the chair, on which thou hast antlered me, and the same to those who engendered the cursed page of misfortune. Get thee to the devil, whence thou camest, go out from before me, from the castle, from the country, and stay not here 1 moment more than is necessary, otherwise I will surely prepare for thee a death by slow fire that shall make thee curse 20 times an hour thy villainous and ribald partner. Hearing the commencement of these little speeches of the seneschal, whose youth came back in his oaths, the page ran away, escaping the rest, and he did well. Brun, burning with a fierce rage, gained the gardens speedily, reviling everything by the way, striking and swearing. He even knocked over 3 large pans held by one of his servants, was carrying the mess to the dogs, and he was so beside himself that he would have killed a labourer for a thank you. He soon perceived his unmaidenly maiden, who was looking towards the road to the monastery, waiting for the page, and unaware that she would never see him again. "Ah, my lady, by the devil's red 3-pronged fork, am I a swallower of taradiddles and a child, to believe that you are so fashioned that a page can behave in this manner and you not know it? By the death, by the head, by the blood." "Hold," she replied, seeing that the mine was sprung, "I knew it well enough, but as you had not instructed me in these matters I thought that I was dreaming." The great ire of the seneschal melted like snow in the sun, for the direst anger of God himself would have vanished at a smile from Blanche. "May 1,000 millions of devils carry off this alien child. I swear that." There. "Do not swear," said she. "If it is not yours, it is mine, and the other night did you not tell me you loved everything that came from me?" Thereupon she ran on with such a lot of arguments, hard words, complaints, quarrels, tears, and other paternosters of women, such as firstly the estates would not have to be returned to the king, that never had a child been brought more innocently into the world, that this, that that, 1,000 things, until the good cuckold relented, and Blanche, seizing a propitious interruption, said, "And where it is the page?" "Gone to the devil." "What, have you killed him?" said she. She turned pale and tottered. Brun did not know what would become of him when he saw thus fall all the happiness of his old age, and he would to save her have shown her this page. He ordered him to be sought, but René had run off at full speed, fearing he should be killed, and departed for the lands beyond the seas, in order to accomplish his vow of religion. When Blanche had learned from the above-mentioned abbot the penitence imposed upon her well-beloved, she fell into a state of great melancholy, saying at times, "Where is he, the poor unfortunate, who is in the middle of great dangers for love of me?" And always kept on asking, like a child who gives its mother no rest until its request be granted it. At these lamentations the poor seneschal, feeling himself to blame, endeavoured to do 1,000 things, putting one out of the question, in order to make Blanche happy, but nothing was equal to the sweet caresses of the page. However, she had one day the child so much desired. You may be sure that was a fine festival for the good cuckold, for the resemblance to the father was distinctly engraved upon the face of this sweet fruit of love. Blanche consoled herself greatly, and picked up again a little of her old gaiety and flower of innocence, which rejoiced the aged hours of the seneschal. From constantly seeing the little one run about, watching its laughs answer those of the countess, he finished by loving it, and would have been in a great rage with anyone who had not believed him its father. Now, as the adventure of Blanche and her page had not been carried beyond the castle, it was related throughout Touraine that Messire Brun had still found himself sufficiently in funds to afford a child. Intact remained the virtue of Blanche, and by the quintessence of instruction drawn by her from the natural reservoir of women, she recognized how necessary it was to be silent concerning the venial sin with which her child was covered. So she became modest and good, and was cited as a virtuous person. And then to make use of him she experimented on the goodness of her good man, and without giving him leave to go further than her chin, since she looked upon herself as belonging to René, Blanche, in return for the flowers of age which Brun offered her, coddled him, smiled upon him, kept him merry, and fondled him with pretty ways and tricks, which good wives bestow upon the husbands they deceive, and all so well, that the seneschal did not wish to die, squatted comfortably in his chair, and the more he lived the more he became partial to life. But to be brief, one night he died without knowing where he was going, for he said to Blanche, "Ho, ho, my dear, I see thee no longer. Is it night?" It was the death of the just, and he had well merited it as a reward for his labours in the Holy Land. 80s. Full-page image, medium size. Blanche held for his death a great and true mourning, weeping for him as one weeps for one's father. She remained melancholy, without wishing to lend her ear to the music of a second wedding, for which she was praised by all good people, who knew not that she had a husband in her heart, a life in hope, but she was the greater part of her time a widow in fact and widow in heart, because hearing no news of her lover at the Crusades, the poor Countess reputed him dead, and during certain nights seeing him wounded and lying at full length, she would wake up in tears. She lived thus for 14 years in the remembrance of one day of happiness. Finally, one day when she had with her certain ladies of Turin, and they were talking together after dinner, behold her little boy, who was at that time about 13 and a half, and resembled René more than it is allowable for a child to resemble his father, and had nothing of the sire Brun about him but his name. Behold the little one, a madcap and pretty like his mother, who came in from the garden, running, perspiring, panting, jumping, scattering all things in his way, after the uses and customs of infancy, and who ran straight to his well-beloved mother, jumping into her lap, and interrupting the conversation, cried out, "Oh, mother, I want to speak to you. I have seen in the courtyard a pilgrim, who squeezed me very tight." "Ah!" cried the chatelaine, hurrying towards one of the servants who had charge of the young count and watched over his precious stays. "I have forbidden you ever to leave my son in the hands of strangers, not even in those of the holiest man in the world. You quit my service." "Alas, my lady," replied the old equerry, quite overcome. This one wished him no harm, for he wept while kissing him passionately. "He wept," said she. "Ah, it's the father." Having said which, she leaned her head upon the chair in which she was sitting, and which you may be sure was the chair in which she has sinned. Hearing these strange words, the ladies were so surprised that at first they did not perceive that the seneschal's widow was dead, without its ever being known if her sudden death was caused by her sorrow at the departure of her lover, who, faithful to his vow, did not wish to see her, or from great joy at his return and the hope of getting the interdict removed which the abbot of Malmstes had placed upon their loves. And there was a great mourning for her, for the Sire de Jallanges lost his spirits when he saw his lady laid in the ground, and became a monk of Malmstes, which at that time was called by some Maimstia, as much as to say Maius Monasterium, the largest monastery, and it was indeed the finest in all France. The king's sweetheart. There lived at this time at the forges of the Ponto Change, a goldsmith whose daughter was talked about in Paris on account of her great beauty, and renowned above all things for her exceeding gracefulness. There were those who sought her favours by the usual tricks of love, but others offered large sums of money to the father to give them his daughter in lawful wedlock, the which pleased him not a little. One of his neighbours, a parliamentary advocate, who by selling his cunning devices to the public had acquired as many lands as a dog has fleas, took it into his head to offer the said father a domain in consideration of his consent to this marriage, which he ardently desired to undertake. To this arrangement our goldsmith was nothing loth. He bargained away his daughter, without taking into consideration the fact that her patched-up old suitor had the features of an ape and had scarcely a tooth in his jaws. The smell which emanated from his mouth did not, however, disturb his own nostrils, although he was filthy and high-flavoured, as are all those who pass their lives amid the smoke of chimneys, yellow parchment, and other black proceedings. Immediately this sweet girl saw him, she exclaimed, "Great heaven! I would rather not have him." "That concerns me not," said the father, who had taken a violent fancy to the proffered domain. "I give him to you for a husband. You must get on as well as you can together. That is his business now, and his duty is to make himself agreeable to you." "Is it so?" said she. "Well then, before I obey your orders I'll let him know what he may expect." And the same evening, after supper, when the lovesick man of law was pleading his cause, telling her he was mad for her, and promising her a life of ease and luxury, she, taking him up, quickly remarked, "My father had sold me to you, but if you take me, you will make a bad bargain, seeing that I would rather offer myself to the passers-by than to you. I promise you a disloyalty that will only finish with death, yours or mine." Then she began to weep, like all young maidens will before they become experienced, for afterwards they never cry with their eyes. The good advocate took this strange behaviour for one of those artifices by which the women seek to fan the flames of love and turn the devotion of their admirers into the more tender caress and more daring osculation that speaks a husband's right. So that the knave took little notice of it, but laughing at the complaints of the charming creature, asked her to fix the day. "Tomorrow," replied she, "for the sooner this odious marriage takes place, the sooner I shall be free to have the gallants and to lead the gay life of those who love where it pleases them." Thereupon the foolish fellow, as firmly fixed as a fly in a glue pot, went away, made his preparations, spoke at the palace, ran to the High Court, bought dispensations, and conducted his purchase more quickly than he ever done one before, thinking only of the lovely girl. Meanwhile the king, who had just returned from a journey, heard nothing spoken of at court but the marvellous beauty of the jeweller's daughter, who had refused 1,000 crowns from this one, snubbed that one, in fact, would yield to no one, but turned up her nose at the finest young men of the city, gentlemen who would have forfeited their seat in paradise only to possess one day this little dragon of virtue. The good king was a judge of such game, strolled into the town, past the forges, and entered the goldsmith's shop, for the purpose of buying jewels for the lady of his heart, but at the same time to bargain for the most precious jewel in the shop. The king not taking a fancy to the jewels, or they not being to his taste, the good man looked in a secret drawer for a big white diamond. 86s. Full-page image, medium size. "Sweetheart," said he, to the daughter, while her father's nose was buried in the drawer, "sweetheart, you were not made to sell precious stones, but to receive them, and if you were to give me all the little rings in the place to choose from, I know one that many here are mad for, that pleases me, to which I should ever be subject and servant, and whose price the whole kingdom of France could never pay." "Ah, sire," replied the maid, "I shall be married tomorrow, but if you will lend me the dagger that is in your belt, I will defend my honour, and you shall take it, that the gospel may be observed wherein it says, 'Render unto Caesar the things which be Caesar's.'" Immediately the king gave her the little dagger, and her brave reply rendered him so amorous that he lost his appetite. He had an apartment prepared, intending to lodge his new lady love in the Rue Lyrondelle, in one of his palaces. And now behold my advocate, in a great hurry to get married, to the disgust of his rivals, the leading his bride to the altar to the clang of bells and the sound of music, so timed as to provoke the qualms of diarrhea. In the evening, after the ball, comes he into the nuptial chamber, where should be reposing his lovely bride. No longer is she a lovely bride, but a fury, a wild she-devil, who, seated in an armchair, refuses her share of her lord's couch, and sits defiantly before the fire, warming at the same time her ire and her calves. The good husband, quite astonished, kneels down gently before her, inviting her to the first passage of arms in that charming battle which heralds a first night of love, but she utters not a word, and when he tries to raise her garment, only just to glance at the charms that have cost him so dear, she gives him a slap that makes his bones rattle, and refuses to utter a syllable. This amusement, however, by no means displeased our friend advocate, who saw at the end of his troubles that which you can as well imagine as he did, so played he his share of the game manfully, taking cheerfully the punishment bestowed upon him. By so much hustling about, scuffling, and struggling he managed at last to tear away a sleeve, to slit a petticoat, until he was able to place his hand upon his own property. This bold endeavour brought Madame to her feet, and drawing the king's dagger, "What would you with me?" she cried. "Everything," answered he. "Ha! I should be a great fool to give myself against my inclination. If you fancied you would find my virtue unarmed, you made a great error. Behold the poniard of the king, with which I will kill you if you make the semblance of a step towards me." So saying, she took a cinder, and having still her eyes upon her lord, she drew a circle on the floor, adding, "These are the confines of the king's domain. Beware how you pass them." 92s. Full-page image, medium size. The advocate, with whose ideas of love-making the dagger sadly interfered, stood quite discomfited, but at the same time he heard the cruel speech of his tormentor. He caught sight through the slits and tears in her robe of a sweet sample of a plump white thigh, and such voluptuous specimens of hidden mysteries, etc., that death seemed sweet to him if he could only taste of them a little. So that he rushed within the domain of the king, saying, "I mind not death." In fact, he came with such force that his charmer fell backwards onto the bed, but keeping her presence of mind, she defended herself so gallantly that the advocate enjoyed no further advantage than a knock at the door that would not admit him, and he gained as well a little stab from the poniard, which did not wound him deeply, so that it did not cost him very dearly his attack upon the realm of his sovereign. But maddened with this slight advantage, he cried, "I cannot live without the possession of that lovely body, and those marvels of love. Kill me then." And again he attacked the royal preserves. The young beauty, whose head was full of the king, was not even touched by this great love, said gravely, "If you menace me further, it is not you but myself I will kill." She glared at him so savagely that the poor man was quite terrified, and commenced to deplore the evil hour in which he had taken her to wife, and thus the night, which should have been so joyous, was passed in tears, lamentations, prayers, and ejaculations. In vain he tempted her with promises. She should eat out of gold, she should be a great lady, he would buy houses and lands for her. Oh, if she would only let him break one lance with her in the sweet conflict of love, he would leave her forever and pass the remainder of his life according to her fantasy. But she, still unyielding, said she would permit him to die, and that was the only thing he could do to please her. "I have not deceived you," said she. "Agreeable to my promise, I shall give myself to the king, making you a present of the peddler, chance passers, and street loungers with whom I threatened you." When the day broke, she put on her wedding garments and waited patiently till the poor husband had to depart to his office client's business, and then ran out into the town to seek the king. But she had not gone about shot from the house before one of the king's servants, who had watched the house from dawn, stopped her with the question, "Do you seek the king?" "Yes," said she. "Good, then allow me to be your good friend," said the subtle courtier. I ask your aid and protection, as now I give you mine." With that he told her what sort of a man the king was, which was his weak side, that he was passionate one day and silent the next, that she would luxuriously lodged and well kept, but that she must keep the king well in hand. In short, he chatted so pleasantly that the time passed quickly until she found herself in the Hotel de l'Hirondelle, where afterwards lived Madame de Stamps. The poor husband shed scalding tears when he found his little bird had flown, and became melancholy and pensive. His friends and neighbours edified his ears with as many taunts and jeers as Saint Jacques had the honour of receiving in Compostela, but the poor fellow took it so to heart that at last they tried rather to assuage his grief. These artful compeers, by a species of legal chicanery, decreed that the good man was not a cuckold, seeing that his wife had refused a consummation, and if the planter of horns had been anyone but the king, the said marriage might have been dissolved, but the amorous spouse was wretched unto death at my lady's trick. However, he left her to the king, determining one day to have her to himself, and thinking that a lifelong shame would not be too dear a payment for a night with her. One must love well to love like that, eh? And there are many worldly ones who mock at such affection. But he, still thinking of her, neglected his cases and his clients, his robberies and everything. He went to the palace like a miser searching for a lost sixpence, bowed down, melancholy, and absent-minded, so much so, that one day he relieved himself against the rope of a counsellor, believing all the while he stood against a wall. Meanwhile the beautiful girl was loved night and day by the king, who could not tear himself from her embraces, because in amorous play she was so excellent, knowing as well how to fan the flame of love as to extinguish it, today snubbing him, tomorrow petting him, never the same, and with it 1,000 little tricks to charm the ardent lover. A lord of Brido killed himself through her, because she would not receive his embraces, although he offered her his land, Brido in Touraine. Of these gallants of Touraine, who gave an estate for one tilt with love's lance, there are none left. This death made the fair one sad, and since her confessor laid the blame of it upon her, she determined for the future to accept all domains and secretly ease their owners' amorous pains for the better saving of their souls from perdition. 'Twas thus she commenced to build up that great fortune which made her a person of consideration in the town. By this means she prevented many gallant gentlemen from perishing, playing her game so well, and inventing such fine stories, that His Majesty little guessed how much she aided him in securing the happiness of his subjects. The fact is, she has such a hold over him that she could have made him believe the floor was the ceiling, which was perhaps easier for him to think than anyone else, seeing that at the Rue Hirondelle my Lord King passed the greater portion of his time embracing her always, as though he would see if such a lovely article would wear away, but he wore himself out first, poor man, seeing that he eventually died from excess of love. Although she took care to grant her favours only to the best and noblest in the court, and that such occasions were rare as miracles, there were not wanting those among her enemies and rivals who declared that for 10,000 crowns the simple gentleman might taste the pleasures of his sovereign, which was false above all falseness, for, when her lord taxed her with it, did she not reply, "Abominable wretches! Curse the devils who put this idea in your head! I never yet did have man who spent less than 30,000 crowns upon me." The king, although vexed, could not repress a smile, and kept her on a month to silence scandal. And last, La Demoiselle de Picelle, anxious to obtain her place, brought about her ruin. Many would have liked to be ruined in the same way, seeing she was taken by a young lord, was happy with him, the fires of love in her being still unquenched. But to take up the thread again, one day that the king's sweetheart was passing through the town in her litter to buy laces, furs, velvets, broideries, and other ammunition, and so charmingly attired, and looking so lovely, that anyone, especially the clerks, would have believed the heavens were open above them. Behold, the good man, who comes upon her near the old cross. She, at that time lazily swinging her charming little foot over the side of the litter, drew in her head as though she had seen an adder. She was a good wife, for I know some who would have proudly passed their husbands, to their shame and to the great disrespect of conjugal rights. "What is the matter?" asked one M. Delaney, who humbly accompanied her. "Nothing," she whispered, "but that person is my husband. Poor man, how changed he looks. Formerly he was the picture of a monkey, today he is the very image of a job." The poor advocate stood open-mouthed. His heart beat rapidly at the sight of that little foot, of that wife so wildly loved. Observing which, the Sire Delaney said to him, with courtly innocence, "If you are her husband, is that any reason you should stop her passage?" At this she burst out laughing, and the good husband, instead of killing her bravely, shed scalding tears at the laugh which pierced his heart, his soul, his everything, so much that he nearly tumbled over an old citizen whom the sight of the king's sweetheart had driven against the wall. The aspect of this weak flower, which had been his in the bud, but far from him had spread its lovely leaves, of the fairy figure, the voluptuous bust, all this made the poor advocate more wretched and more mad for her than it is possible to express in words. You must have been madly in love with a woman who refuses your advances thoroughly to understand the agony of this unhappy man. Rare indeed is it to be so infatuated as he was. He swore that life, fortune, honour, all might go, but that for once at least he would be flesh to flesh with her, and make so grand a repast off her dainty body as would suffice him all his life. He passed the night saying, "Oh, yes, I'll have her. And curses, am I not her husband? And devil take me," striking himself on the forehead and tossing about. There are chances and occasions which occur so opportunely in this world that little-minded men refuse them credence, saying they are supernatural, but men of high intellect know them to be true because they could not be invented. One of the chances came to the poor advocate, even the day after the terrible one which had been so sore a trial to him. One of his clients, a man of good renown, who had his audiences with the king, came one morning to the advocate, saying that he required immediately a large sum of money, about 12,000 crowns. To which the artful fellow replied, 12,000 crowns were not so often met at the corner of a street as that which often is seen at the corner of the street, that besides the sureties and guarantees of interest, it was necessary to find a man who had about him 12,000 crowns, and that those gentlemen were not numerous in Paris, big city as it was, and various other things of a like character. The man of cunning remarked, "Is it true, my lord, that you have a hungry and relentless creditor?" said he. Yes, yes," replied the other, "it concerns the mistress of the king. Don't breathe a syllable, but this evening, in consideration of 20,000 crowns and my domain of Brie, I shall take a measure." Upon this the advocate blanched, and the courtier perceived he touched a tender point. As he had only lately returned from the wars, he did not know that the lovely woman adored by the king had a husband. "You appear ill," he said. "I have a fever," replied the knave. "But is it to her that you give the contract and the money?" "Yes." "Who then manages the bargain? Is it she also?" "No," said the noble. "Her little arrangements are concluded through a servant of hers, the cleverest little lady's maid that ever was. She's sharper than mustard, and these nights stolen from the king have lined her pockets well. I know a Lombard who would accommodate you, but nothing can be done, of the 12,000 crowns you shall not have a brass farthing if this same lady's maid does not come here to take the price of the article that is so great an alchemist that turns blood into gold, by heaven. It will be a good trick to make her sign the receipt, replied the lord, laughing. The servant came faithfully to the rendezvous with the advocate, who had begged the lord to bring her. The ducats looked bright and beautiful. There they lay all in a row, like nuns going to vespers. Spread out upon the table they would have made a donkey smile, even if he were being gutted alive, so lovely, so splendid, were those brave noble young piles. The good advocate, however, had prepared this view for no ass, for the little handmaiden looked longingly at the golden heap, and muttered a prayer at the sight of them. Seeing which, the husband whispered in her ear his golden words, "These are for you." "Ah," said she, "I have never been so well paid." "My dear," replied the dear man, "you shall have them without being troubled with me," and turning her round, "Your client has not told you who I am, eh? No? Learn then. I am the husband of the lady whom the king has debauched, and whom you serve. Carry her these crowns, and come back here. I will hand over yours to you on a condition which will be to your taste." The servant did as she was bidden, and being very curious to know how she could get 12,000 crowns without sleeping with the advocate, was very soon back again. "Now, my little one," said he, "here are 12,000 crowns. With this sum I could buy lands, men, women, and the conscience of 3 priests at least, so that I believe if I give it to you I can have you, body, soul, and toe-nails. And I shall have faith in you like an advocate. I expect that you will go to the lord who expects to pass the night with my wife, and you will deceive him by telling him that the king is coming to supper with her, and that tonight he must seek his little amusements elsewhere. By so doing I shall be able to take his place and the king's." "But how?" said she. "Oh," replied he, "I have bought you, you and your tricks. You won't have to look at these crowns twice without finding me a way to have my wife. In bringing this conjunction about you commit no sin. It is a work of piety to bring together 2 people whose hands only been put one into the other, and that by the priest. By my faith, come," said she, "after supper the lights will be put out, and you can enjoy madam if you remain silent." Luckily, on these joyful occasions she cries more than she speaks, and asks questions with her hands alone, for she is very modest, and does not like loose jokes, like the ladies of the court. "Oh," cried the advocate, "look, take the 12,000 crowns. And I promise you twice as much more if I get by fraud that which belongs to me by right." Then he arranged the hour, the door, the signal, and all, and the servant went away, bearing with her on the back of the mules the golden treasure wrung by fraud and the trickery from the widow and the orphan, and they were all going to that place where everything goes, save our lives, which come from it. Now behold my advocate, who shaves himself, scents himself, goes without onions for dinner that his breath may be sweet, and does everything to make himself as presentable as a gallant senior. He gives himself the airs of a young dandy, tries to be lithe and frisky and to disguise his ugly face. He might try all he knew, he always smelt of the musty lawyer. He was not so clever as the pretty washerwoman of Portland who one day wishing to appear at her best before one of her lovers, got rid of a disagreeable odour in a manner well known to young women of an inventive din of mind. But our crafty fellow fancied himself the nicest man in the world, although in spite of his drugs and perfumes he was really the nastiest. He dressed himself in his thinnest clothes, although the cold pinched him like a rope collar, and sallied forth, quickly gaining the rude hirondelle. There he had to wait some time. But just as he was beginning to think he had been made a fool of, and just as it was quite dark, The maid came down and opened like the door to him, and good husband slipped gleefully into the king's apartment. The girl locked him carefully in a cupboard that was close to his wife's bed, and through a crack he feasted his eyes upon her beauty, for she undressed herself before the fire, and put on a thin nightgown, through which her charms were plainly visible. Believing herself alone with her maid, she made those little jokes that women will when undressing. Am I not worth 20,000 crowns tonight? Is that overpaid with a castle in Brie? And saying this, she gently raised two white supports, firm as rocks, which had well sustained many assaults, seeing they had been furiously attacked and had not softened. My shoulders alone are worth a kingdom. No king could make their equal. But I am tired of this life. That which is hard work is no pleasure. The little maid smiled, and her lovely mistress said to her, I should like to see you in my place. Then the maid laughed, saying, Be quiet, madam, he is there. Who? Your husband. Which? The real one. Chut, said madam. And her maid told her the whole story, wishing to keep her favour and the 12,000 crowns as well. Oh well, he shall have his money's worth. I'll give his desires time to cool. If he tastes me, may I lose my beauty and become as ugly as a monkey's baby. You get into bed in my place and thus gain the 12,000 crowns. Go and tell him that he must take himself off early in the morning in order that I may not find out your trick upon me, and just before dawn I will get in by his side. The poor husband was freezing and his teeth were chattering, and the chambermaid coming to the cupboard on pretence of getting some linen, said to him, Your hour of bliss approaches. Madam tonight has made grand preparations and you will be well served. But work without whistling, otherwise I shall be lost. At last, when the good husband was on the point of perishing with cold, the lights were put out. The maid cried softly in the curtains to the king's sweetheart that his lordship was there, and jumped into bed, while her mistress went out as if she had been the chambermaid. The advocate, released from his cold hiding-place, rolled rapturously into the warm sheets, thinking to himself, Oh, this is good. To tell the truth, the maid gave him his money's worth, and the good man thought of the difference between the profusion of the royal houses and the niggardly ways of the citizens' wives. The servant, laughing, played her part marvellously well, regaling the knave with gentle cries, shiverings, convulsions and tossings about, like a newly caught fish on the grass, giving little ahs, in default of other words, and as often as the request was made by her, so often was it complied with by the advocate, who dropped off to sleep at last, like an empty pocket. But before finishing, the lover wished to preserve a souvenir of this sweet night of love, by a dexterous turn, plucked out one of his wife's hairs, wherefrom I know not, seeing I was not there, and kept in his hand this precious gauge of the warm virtue of that lovely creature. Towards the morning, when the cock crew, the wife slipped in beside her husband, and pretended to sleep. Then the maid tapped gently on the happy man's forehead, whispering in his ear, It is time, get into your clothes and off you go, it's daylight. The good man grieved to lose his treasure, and wished to see the source of his vanished happiness. Oh, said he, proceeding to compare certain things, I've got light hair, and this is dark. What have you done? Said the servant, Madam will see she has been duped. But look. Ah, said she, with an air of disdain, do you not know, you who knows everything, that which is plucked dies and discolours? And thereupon, roaring with laughter at the good joke, she pushed him out of doors. This became known. The poor advocate, named Varan, died of shame, seeing that he was the only one who had not his own wife, while she, who was from this was called La Belle Fournier, married, after leaving the king, a young lord, Count of Balzac. and in her old days she would relate the story, laughingly adding that she had never scented the knave's flavour. This teaches us not to attach ourselves more than we can help to wives who refuse to support our yoke. The Devil's Heir. There once was a good old canon of Notre Dame de Paris, who lived in a fine house of his own, near Street Pierre Roboeufs, in the Pavis. This canon had come a simple priest to Paris, naked as a dagger without its sheath. But since he was found to be a handsome man, well furnished with everything, and so well constituted, that if necessary he was able to do the work of many, without doing himself much harm, he gave himself up earnestly to the confessing of ladies, giving to the melancholy a gentle absolution, to the sick a dram of his balm, to all some little dainty. He was so well known for his discretion, his benevolence, and other ecclesiastical qualities, that he had customers at court. Then, in order not to awaken the jealousy of the officials, that of the husbands and others, in short, to endow with sanctity these good and profitable practices, the Lady d'Esquerdes gave him a bone of street. Victor, by virtue of which all the miracles were performed. And to the curious it was said, he has a bone which will cure everything, and to this no one found anything to reply, because it was not seemly to suspect relics. Beneath the shade of his cassock, the good priest had the best of reputations, that of a man valiant and arms. So he lived like a king. He made money with holy water, sprinkled it and transmitted the holy water into good wine. More than that, his name lay snugly in all the et ceteras of the notaries, in wills or in codicils, which certain people have falsely written codicil, seeing that the word is derived from coda, as if to say the tale of the legacy. In fact, the good old long skirts would have been made an archbishop if he had only said in joke, I should like to put on a mitre for a handkerchief in order to have my head warmer. Of all the benefices offered to him, he chose only a simple canon's stall to keep the good profits of the confessional. But one day the courageous canon found himself weak in the back, seeing that he was all 68 years old, and had held many confessionals. Then, thinking over all his good works, he thought it about time to cease his apostolic labours, the more so, as he possessed about 100,000 crowns earned by the sweat of his body. From that day he only confessed ladies of high lineage, and did it very well. So that it was said at court that in spite of the efforts of the best young clerks, there was still no one but the canon of Street Pierre Roboeufs to properly bleach the soul of a lady of condition. Then at length the canon became by force of nature a fine nonagenarian, snowy about the head, with trembling hands, but square as a tower, having spat so much without coughing, that he coughed now without being able to spit, and no longer rising from his chair, he who had so often risen for humanity, but drinking dry, eating heartily, saying nothing, but having all the appearance of a living canon of Notre Dame. Seeing the immobility of the aforesaid canon, seeing the stories of his evil life which for some time had circulated among the common people, always ignorant, seeing his dumb seclusion, his flourishing health, his young old age, and other things too numerous to mention, there were certain people who, to do the marvellous and injure our holy religion, went about saying that the true canon was long since dead, and that for more than 50 years the devil had taken possession of the old priest's body. In fact, it seemed to his former customers that the devil could only by his great heat have furnished these hermetic distillations, that they remembered to have obtained on demand from this good confessor, who always had led diablo cour. But as this devil had been undoubtedly cooked and ruined by them, and that for a queen of 20 years he would not have moved well-disposed people and those not wanting in sense, or the citizens who argued about everything, people who found lice in bald heads, demanded why the devil rested under the form of a canon, went to the church of Notre Dame at the hours when the canons usually go, and ventured so far as to sniff the perfume of the incense, taste the holy water, and 1,000 other things. To these heretical propositions some said that doubtless the devil wished to convert himself, and others that he remained in the shape of the canon to mock at the 3 nephews and heirs of the said brave confessor and make them wait until the day of their own death for the impulse succession of this uncle, to whom they paid great attention every day, going to look if the good man had his eyes open, and in fact found him always with his eye clear, bright, and piercing as the eye of a basilisk, which pleased them greatly, since they loved their uncle very much, in words. On this subject an old woman related that for certain the canon was the devil, because his 2 nephews, the procureur and the captain, conducting their uncle at night, without a lamp, or lantern, returning from a supper of the penitentiaries, had caused him by accident to tumble over a heap of stones gathered together to raise the statue of Street Christopher. At first the old man had struck fire in falling, but was, amid the cries of his ear and nephews, and by the light of the torches they came to seek at her house, found standing up as straight as a skittle and as gay as a weaving wool, exclaiming that the good wine of the penitentiary had given him the courage to sustain this shock, and that his bones were exceedingly hard and had sustained rude assaults. The good nephews, believing him dead, were much astonished, and perceived that the day that was to dispatch their uncle was a long way off, seeing that at the business stones were of no use. So that they did not falsely call him their good uncle, seeing that he was of good quality. Certain scandal-mongers said that the canon found so many stones in his path that he stayed at home not to be ill with a stone, and the fear of worse was the cause of his seclusion. Of all these sayings and rumours, it remains that the old canon, devil or not, kept his house, and refused to die, and had 3 heirs with whom he lived as with his sciaticas, lumbagos, and other appendage of human life. Of the said 3 heirs, one was the wickedest soldier ever born of a woman, and he must have considerably hurt her in breaking his egg, since he was born with teeth and bristles. So that he ate 2-fold, for the present and the future, keeping wenches whose cost he paid, inheriting from his uncle the continuance, strength, and good use of that which is often of service. In great battles, he endeavoured always to give blows without receiving them, which is, and always will be, the only problem to solve in war, but he never spared himself and, in fact, as he had no other virtue except his bravery, he was captain of a company of lancers, and much esteemed by the Duke of Burgoyne, who never troubled what his soldiers did elsewhere. This nephew of the devil was named Captain Cocknigrew, and his creditors, the blockheads, citizens, and others, whose pockets he slit, called him the Morsinge, since he was as mischievous as strong, but he had moreover his back spoiled by the natural infirmity of a hump, and it would have been unwise to attempt to mount thereon to get a good view, for he would incontestably have run you through. The second had studied the laws, and through the favour of his uncle had become a procureur, and practised at the palace, where he did the business of the ladies, whom formerly the canon had the best confessed. This one was called Pilgrew, to banter him upon his real name, which was Cocknigrew, like that of his brother the captain. Pilgrew had a lean body, seemed to throw off very cold water, was pale of face, and possessed a physiognomy like a polecat. This notwithstanding, he was worth many a penny more than the captain, and had for his uncle a little affection, but since about 2 years its heart had cracked a little, and drop by drop his gratitude had run out, in such a way that from time to time, when the air was damp, he liked to put his feet into his uncle's hose, and press in advance the juice of this good inheritance. He and his brother, the soldier, found their share very small, since loyally, in law, in fact, in justice, in nature, and in reality, it was necessary to give the third part of everything to a poor cousin, son of another sister of the canon, the which heir, but little loved by the good man, remained in the country, where he was a shepherd, near Nanterre. The guardian of beasts, an ordinary peasant, came to town by the advice of his two cousins, who placed him in their uncle's house, in the hope that, as much by his silly tricks and his clumsiness, his want of brain, and his ignorance, he would be displeasing to the canon, who would kick him out of his will. Now this poor chicken, as the shepherd was named, had lived about a month alone with his old uncle, and finding more profit or more amusement in minding an abbot than looking after sheep, made himself the canon's dog, his servant, the staff of his old age, saying, God keep you, when he passed wind, God save you, when he sneezed, and God guard you, when he belched, going to see if it rained, where the cat was, remaining silent, listening, speaking, receiving the coughs of the old man in his face, admiring him as the finest canon there ever was in the world, all heartily and in good faith, knowing that he was licking him after the manner of animals who clean their young ones, and the uncle, who stood in no need of learning which side the bread was buttered, repulsed poor chicken, making him turn about like a die, always calling him chicken, and always saying to his other nephews that this chicken was helping to kill him, such a numbskull was he. Thereupon, hearing this, chicken determined to do well by his uncle, and puzzled his understanding to appear better, but as he had a behind shaped like a pair of pumpkins, was broad-shouldered, large-limbed, and far from sharp, he more resembled old Sinews than a gentle zephyr. In fact, the poor shepherd, a simple man, could not reform himself, so he remained big and fat, awaiting his inheritance to make himself thin. One evening the canon began discoursing concerning the devil and the grave agonies, penances, tortures, etc., which God will get warm for the accursed, and the good chicken, hearing it, began to open his eyes as wide as the door of an oven, at the statement, without believing a word of it. What, said the canon, are you not a Christian? In that, yes, answered chicken. Well, there is a paradise for the good, is it not necessary to have a hell for the wicked? Yes, Mr. Canon, but the devil's of no use. If you had here a wicked man who turned everything upside down, would you not kick him out of Oz? Yes, chicken. Oh, well, mine uncle, God would be very stupid to leave in this world, which he has so curiously constructed, an abominable devil whose special business it is to spoil everything for him. Pish! I recognize no devil if there be a good God, you may depend upon that. I should very much like to see the devil. Ha, ha! I am not afraid of his claws. And if I were of your opinion, I should have no care of my very youthful years in which I held confessions at least 10 times a day. Confess again, Mr. Canon. I assure you that will be a precious merit on high. There, there. Do you mean it? Yes, Mr. Canon. Thou dost not tremble, chicken, to deny the devil? I trouble no more about it than a sheaf of corn. The doctrine will bring misfortune upon you. By no means. God will defend me from the devil because I believe him more learned and less stupid than the savans make him out. Thereupon the 2 other nephews entered, and perceiving from the voice of the canon that he did not dislike chicken very much, and that the jeremiads which he had made concerning him were simple tricks to disguise the affection which he bore him, looked at each other in great astonishment. Then, seeing their uncle laughing, they said to him, If you will make a will, to whom will you leave the house? To chicken. And the quit rent of the Rue Street deniers? To chicken. And the fief of Villeparises? To chicken. But, said the captain, with his big voice, everything then will be chicken's. No, replied the canon, smiling, because I shall have made my will in proper form. The inheritance will be to the sharpest of you 3. I am so near to the future, that I can therein see clearly your destinies. And the wily canon cast upon chicken a glance full of malice, like a decoy bird would have thrown upon a little one to draw him into her net. The fire of his flaming eye enlightened the shepherd, who from that moment had his understanding and his ears all unfogged, and his brain open, like that of a maiden the day after her marriage. The procurer and the captain, taking these sayings for gospel prophecies, made their bow and went out from the house, quite perplexed at the absurd designs of the canon. "What do you think of Chicken?" said Pilgrim to Morsinge. I think, said the soldier, growling, "that I think of hiding myself in the road Jerusalem, to put his head below his feet. He can pick it up again if he likes." Oh, said the procurer, "you have a way of wounding that is easily recognized, and people would say it's cock-a-grue. As for me, I thought to invite him to dinner, after which we would play at putting ourselves in a sack in order to see, as they do at court, who could walk best thus attired. Then having sewn him up, we could throw him into the Seine, at the same time begging him to swim." "This must be well matured," replied the soldier. "Oh, it's quite ripe," said the advocate. "The cousin gone to the devil, the heritage would then be between us two." "I'm quite agreeable," said the fighter, "but we must stick as close together as the two legs of the same body, for if you are fine as silk, I as strong as steel, and daggers are always as good as traps. You hear that, my good brother?" "Yes," said the advocate, "the cause is heard. Now shall it be the thread or the iron?" "Eh? Vete Dieu. Is it then a king that we are going to settle? For a simple numbskull of a shepherd are so many words necessary? Come, 20,000 francs out of the heritage to the one of us who shall first cut him off. I'll say to him in good faith, pick up your head. 115s. Full page image, medium size. And I, swim my friend, cried the advocate, laughing like the gap of a paw-point. And then they went to supper, the captain to his wench, and the advocate to the house of a jeweller's wife, of whom he was the lover. Who was astonished? Chicken. The poor shepherd heard the planning of his death, although the two cousins had walked in the parvis, and talked to each other as everyone speaks at church when praying to God. So that Chicken was much coupled to know if the words had come up or if his ears had gone down. "Do you hear, Mr. Canon?" "Yes," said he, "I hear the wood crackling in the fire." "Ho, ho," replied Chicken, "if I don't believe in the devil, I believe in Saint Michael, my guardian angel. I go there where he calls me." "Go, my child," said the canon, "and take care not to wet yourself, nor to get your head knocked off, for I think I hear Moraine, and the beggars in the street are not always the most dangerous beggars." At these words Chicken was much astonished, and stared at the canon, found his manner gay, his eye sharp, and his feet crooked, but as he had to arrange matters concerning the death which menaced him, he thought to himself that he would always have leisure to admire the canon, or to cut his nails, and he trotted off quickly through the town, as a little woman trots towards her pleasure. His two cousins, having no presumption of the divinatory science, of which shepherds have had many passing attacks, had often talked before him of their secret goings-on, counting him as nothing. Now one evening, to amuse the canon, Pilgrim had recounted to him how had fallen in love with him a wife of a jeweller on whose head he had adjusted certain carved, burnished, sculptured, historical horns, fit for the brow of a prince. The good lady was to hear him, a right merry wench, quick at opportunities, giving an embrace while her husband was mounting the stairs, devouring the commodity as if she was swallowing a strawberry, only thinking of love-making, always trifling and frisky, gay as an honest woman who lacks nothing, contenting her husband, who cherished her so much as he loved his own gullet, subtle as a perfume, so much so, that for 5 years she managed so well with his household affairs, and her own love affairs, that she had the reputation of a prudent woman, the confidence of her husband, the keys of the house, the purse, and all. "And when do you play upon this gentle flute?" said the canon. "Every evening, and sometimes I stay all the night." "But how?" said the canon, astonished. "This is how. There is a room close to, a chest into which I get. When the good husband returns from his friend the draper's, where he goes to supper every evening, because often he helps the draper's wife in her work, my mistress pleads a slight illness, lets him go to bed alone, and comes to doctor her malady in the room where the chest is. On the morrow, when my jeweller is at his forge, I depart, and as the house has one exit onto the bridge, and another into the street, I always come to the door when the husband is not, on the pretext of speaking to him of his suits, which commence joyfully and heartily, and I never let them come to an end. It is an income from cuckoldom, seeing that in the minor expenses and loyal costs of the proceedings, he spends as much as on the horses in his stable. He loves me well, as all good cuckolds should love the man who aids them to plant, cultivate, water and dig the natural garden of Venus, and he does nothing without me." Now these practices came back again to the memory of the shepherd, who was illuminated by the light issuing from his danger, and counselled by the intelligence of those measures of self-preservation, of which every animal possesses a sufficient dose to go to the end of his ball of life. So Chicken gained with hasty feet the Rue de la Calandra, where the jeweller should be supping with his companion, and after having knocked at the door, replied to question put to him through the little grill, that he was a messenger on state secrets, and was admitted to the draper's house. Now, coming straight to the fact, he made the happy jeweller get up from his table, led him to a corner, and said to him, "If one of your neighbours had planted a horn on your forehead and he was delivered to you, bound hand and foot, would you throw him into the river?" "Rather," said the jeweller, "but if you are mocking me, I'll give you a good drubbing." "There, there," replied Chicken, "I am one of your friends, and come to warn you that as many times as you have conversed with a draper's wife here, as often has your own wife been served the same way by the advocate Pilgrew, and if you will come back to your forge, you will find a good fire there. On your arrival, he who looks after your you-know-what, to keep it in good order, gets into the big clothes chest. Now make a pretence that I have bought the said chest of you, and I will be upon the bridge with a cart, waiting your orders." The said jeweller took his cloak and his hat, and parted company with his crony without saying a word, and ran to his hole like a poisoned rat. He arrives and knocks, the door is opened. He runs hastily up the stairs, finds 2 covers laid, sees his wife coming out of the chamber of love, and then says to her, "My dear, here are 2 covers laid." "Well, my darling, are we not 2? "No," said he, "we are 3. "Is your friend coming?" said she, looking towards the stairs with perfect innocence. "No, I speak of the friend who is in the chest." "What chest?" said she. "Are you in your sound senses? Where do you see a chest? Is that usual to put friends in chests? Am I a woman to keep chests full of friends? How long have friends been kept in chests? Are you come home, man, to mix up your friends with your chests? I know no other friend than Master Cornel the draper, and no other chest than the one with our clothes in." "Oh," said the jeweller, "my good woman, there is a bad young man, who has come to warn me that you allow yourself to be embraced by our advocate, and that he is in the chest." "Aye," said she, "I would not put up with this knavery, he does everything the wrong way." "There, there, my dear," replied the jeweller, "I know you to be a good woman, and won't have a squabble with you about this paltry chest. The giver of the warning is a box-maker, to whom I am about to sell this cursed chest that I wish never again to see in my house, and for this one he will sell me 2 pretty little ones, in which there will not be space enough even for a child. Thus the scandal and the babble of those envious of your virtue will be extinguished for want of nourishment. You give me great pleasure, said she. I don't attach any value to my chest, and by chance there is nothing in it. Our linen is at the Washington. It will be easy to have the mischievous chest taken away tomorrow morning. Will you sup? Not at all, said he. I shall sup with a better appetite without the chest. I see, said she, that you won't easily get the chest out of your head. Halloa, there, said the jeweller to his smiths and apprentices, come down. In the twinkling of an eye his people were before him. Then he, their master, having briefly ordered the handling of the said chest, this piece of furniture dedicated to love was tumbled across the room, but in passing the advocate, finding his feet in the air to the which he was not accustomed, tumbled over a little. Go on, said the wife, go on, it's the lid shaking. No, my dear, it's the bolt. And without any other opposition the chest slid gently down the stairs. Ho there, carrier, said the jeweller, and Chicken came whistling his mules, and the good apprentices lifted the litigious chest into the cart. Hi, hi, said the advocate. Master, the chest is speaking, said an apprentice. In what language? Said the jeweller, giving him a good kick between two features that luckily were not made of glass. The apprentice tumbled over onto a stair in a way that induced him to discontinue his studies in the language of chests. The shepherd, accompanied by the good jeweller, carried all the baggage to the waterside without listening to the high eloquence of the speaking wood, and having tied several stones to it, the jeweller threw it into the Seine. Swim, my friend, cried the shepherd, in a voice sufficiently jeering at the moment when the chest turned over, giving a pretty little plunge like a duck. Then Chicken continued to proceed along the quay, as far as the Rue du Port, street laundry, near the cloisters of Notre Dame. There he noticed a house, recognized the door, and knocked loudly. Open, said he, open by order of the king. Hearing this, an old man who was no other than the famous Lombard, Versaris, ran to the door. What is it? Said he. I am sent by the provost to warn you to keep good watch tonight, replied Chicken. As for his own part, he will keep his archers ready. The hunchback who has robbed you has come back again. Keep under arms, for he is quite capable of easing you of the rest. Having said this, the good shepherd took to his heels and ran to the Rue des Marmousets, to the house where Captain Cockegrew was feasting with La Pasquerette, the prettiest of town girls, and the most charming in perversity that ever was. According to all the gay ladies, her glance was sharp and piercing as the stab of a dagger. Her appearance was so tickling to the sight that it would have put all Paradise to rout. Besides which she was as bold as a woman who has no other virtue than her insolence. Poor Chicken was greatly embarrassed while going to the quarter of the Marmousets. He was greatly afraid that he would be unable to find the house of La Pasquerette, or find the two pigeons gone to roost, but a good angel arranged speedily to his satisfaction. This is how. On entering the Rue des Marmousets, he saw several lights at the windows and night-capped heads thrust out, and good wenches, gay girls, housewives, husbands, and young ladies, all of them are just out of bed, looking at each other as if a robber were being led to execution by torchlight. What's the matter? Said the shepherd to a citizen who in great haste had rushed to the door with a chamber utensil in his hand. Oh, it's nothing, replied the good man. We thought it was the Armagnacs descending upon the town, but it's only Morsange beating La Pasquerette. Where? Asked the shepherd. Below there, at that fine house where the pillars have the mouths of flying frogs delicately carved upon them. Do you hear the valets and the serving maids? And in fact there was nothing but cries of murder. Help! Come, someone! and in the house blows raining down, and the Morsinge said with his gruff voice, "Death to the wench. Ah, you sing out now, do you? Ah, you want your money now, do you? Take that." And La Pasquerette was groaning, "Oh, oh, I die. Help, help, oh, oh." Then came the blow of a sword, and the heavy fall of a light body of the fair girl sounded, and was followed by a great silence, after which the lights were put out. Servants, waiting women, roisterers, and others went in again, and the shepherd who had come opportunely mounted the stairs in company with them, but on beholding in the room above broken glasses, slit carpets, and the cloth on the floor with the dishes, everyone remained at a distance. The shepherd, bold as a man with but one end in view, opened the door of the handsome chamber where slept La Pasquerette, and found her quite exhausted, her hair dishevelled, and her neck twisted, lying upon a bloody carpet, and Morsinge frightened, with his tone considerably lower, and not knowing upon what note to sing the remainder of his anthem. "Come, my little Pasquerette, don't pretend to be dead. Come, let me put you tidy. Ah, little minx, dead or alive, you look so pretty in your blood, I'm going to kiss you." Having said which, the cunning soldier took her and threw her upon the bed, but she fell there all of a heap, and stiff as the body of a man that had been hanged. Seeing which, her companion found it was time for his hump to retire from the game. However, the artful fellow, before slinking away, said, "Poor Pasquerette, how could I murder so good of girl, and one I loved so much? But, yes, I have killed her, the thing is clear, for in her life never did her sweet breast hang down like that. Good God, one would say it was a crown at the bottom of a wallet." Thereupon Pasquerette opened her eyes, and then bent her head slightly to look at her flesh, which was white and firm, and she brought herself to life by a box on the ears, administered to the captain. "That will teach you to beware of the dead," said she, smiling. "And why did he kill you, my cousin?" asked the shepherd. "Why, tomorrow the bailiffs sees everything that's here, and he who has no more money than virtue reproached me because I wished to be agreeable to a handsome gentleman who would save me from the hands of justice. Pasquerette, I'll break every bone in your skin." "There, there," said Chicken, whom the Morsinge had just recognized, "is that all?" "Oh, well, my good friend, I bring you a large sum." "Where from?" asked the captain, astonished. "Come here, and let me whisper in your ear. If 30,000 crowns were walking about at night under the shadow of a pear tree, would you not stoop down to pluck them, to prevent them spoiling? Chicken, I'll kill you like a dog if you are making game of me, or I will kiss you there where you like it, if you will put me opposite 30,000 crowns, even when it shall be necessary to kill 3 citizens at the corner of the quay. You will not even kill one. This is how the matter stands. I have for a sweetheart in all loyalty, the servant of the Lombard who is in the city near the house of our good uncle. Now, I have just learned on sound information that this dear man has departed this morning into the country after having hidden under a pear tree in his garden a good bushel of gold, believing himself to be seen only by the angels. But the girl who had by chance a bad toothache, and was taking the air at her garret window, spied the old Crookshanks, without wishing to do so, and chattered of it to me in fondness. If you will swear to give me a good share, I will lend you my shoulders in order that you may climb onto the top of the wall and from the throw yourself into the pear tree, which is against the wall. There, now do you say that I am a blockhead, an animal? No, you are a right loyal cousin, an honest man. And if you have ever to put an enemy out of the way, I am there, ready to kill even one of my own friends for you. I am no longer your cousin, but your brother. Ho there. Sweetheart, cried Morsinge to La Pasquerette, put the tables straight, wipe up your blood, it belongs to me, and I'll pay you for it by giving you 100 times as much of mine as I have taken of thine. Make the best of it, shake the black dog off your back, adjust your petticoats, laugh, I wish it, look to the stew, and let us recommence our evening prayer where we left it off. Tomorrow I'll make thee braver than a queen. This is my cousin, whom I wish to entertain, even when to do so it were necessary to turn the house out of windows. We shall get back everything tomorrow in the cellars. Come, fall to. Thus, and in less time than it takes a priest to say his Dominus vobiscum, the whole rookery passed from tears to laughter as it had previously from laughter to tears. It is only in these houses of ill fame that love is made with a blow of a dagger, and where tempests of joy rage between four walls. But these are things ladies of the high-necked dress do not understand. The said Captain Cockegrew was gay as 100 schoolboys at the breaking up of class, and made his good cousin drink deeply, who spilled everything country fashion, and pretended to be drunk, spluttering out 100 stupidities, as, that tomorrow he would buy Paris, would lend 100,000 crowns to the king, that he would be able to roll in gold. In fact, talked so much nonsense that the captain, fearing some compromising of Owl and thinking his brain quite muddled enough, led him outside with a good intention, instead of sharing with him, of ripping Chicken open to see if he had not a sponge in his stomach, because he had just soaked in a big quart of the good wine of Chores. They went along, disputing about 1,000 theological subjects which got very much mixed up, and finished by rolling quietly up against the garden where were the crowns of the Lombard. Then Cockegrew, making a ladder of Chicken's broad shoulders, jumped onto the pear tree like a man expert in attacks upon towns, but Verceris, who was watching him, made a blow at his neck, and repeated it so vigorously that with 3 blows fell the upper portion of the said Cockegrew, but not until he had heard the clear voice of the shepherd, who cried to him, "Pick up your head, my friend." Thereupon the generous Chicken, in whom virtue received its recompense, thought it would be wise to return to the house of the good canon, whose heritage was by the grace of God considerably simplified. Thus he gained the Rue Street Pierre Roboeufs with all speed, and soon slept like a newborn baby, no longer knowing the meaning of the word cousin German. Now, on the morrow he rose according to the habit of shepherds, with the sun, and came into his uncle's room to inquire if he spat white, if he coughed, if he had slept well, but the old servant told him that the canon, hearing the bells of St. Maurice, the first patron of Notre Dame, ring for matins, he had gone out of reverence to the cathedral, where all the chapter were to breakfast with the Bishop of Paris, upon which Chicken replied, "Is his reverence the canon out of his senses thus to disport himself, to catch a cold, to get rheumatism? Does he wish to die? I light a big fire to warm him when he returns." And the good shepherd ran into the room where the canon generally sat, and to his great astonishment beheld him seated in his chair. What did she mean, that fool of a Bruette? I knew you were too well advised to be shivering at this hour in your stall. The canon said not a word. The shepherd, who was like all thinkers, a man of hidden sense, was quite aware that sometimes old men have strange crotchets, converse with the essence of occult things, and mumble to themselves discourses concerning matters not under consideration, so that, from reverence and great respect for the secret meditations of the canon, he went and sat down at a distance, and waited the termination of these dreams, noticing, silently, the length of the good man's nails, which looked like cobbler's awls, and looking attentively at the feet of his uncle, he was astonished to see the flesh of his legs so crimson, that it reddened his breeches and seemed all on fire through his hose. He is dead, thought Chicken. At this moment the door of the room opened, and he still saw the canon, who, his nose frozen, came back from church. "Ho, ho," said Chicken. "My dear uncle, are you out of your senses? Kindly take notice that you ought not to be at the door, because you are already seated in your chair in the chimney corner, and that it is impossible for there to be two canons like you in the world." "Ah, Chicken, there was a time when I could have wished to be in two places at once, but such is not the fate of a man. He would be too happy. Are you getting dim-sighted? I am alone here." Then Chicken turned his head towards the chair, and found it empty, and much astonished, as you will easily believe, he approached it, and found on the seat a little pat of cinders, from which ascended a strong odour of sulphur. "Ah," said he merrily, "I perceive that the devil has behaved well towards me. I will pray God for him." And thereupon he related naively to the canon how the devil had amused himself by playing at Providence, and had loyally aided him to get rid of his wicked cousins, the which the canon admired much, and thought very good, seeing that he had plenty of good sense left, and often had observed things which were to the devil's advantage. So the good old priest remarked that as much good was always met with in evil as evil in good, and that therefore one should not trouble too much after the other world, the which was a grave heresy, which many councils have put right. And this was how the Chickens became rich, and were able in these times, by the fortunes of their ancestors, to help to build the bridge of St. Michael, where the devil cuts a very good figure under the angel, in memory of this adventure now consigned to these veracious histories. The merry jests of King Louis XI. King Louis XI was a merry fellow, loving a good joke, and the interests of his position as king, and those of the church on one side, he lived jovially, giving chase to soiled doves as often as to hares, and other royal game. Therefore, the sorry scribblers who have made him out a hypocrite, showed plainly that they knew him not, since he was a good friend, good at repartee, and a jollier fellow than any of them. It was he who said when he was in a merry mood, that four things are excellent and opportune in life: to keep warm, to drink cool, to stand up hard, and to swallow soft. Certain persons have accused him of taking up with the dirty drollops. This is a notorious falsehood, since all his mistresses, of whom one was legitimized, came of good houses and had notable establishments. He did not go in for waste and extravagance, always put his hand upon the solid, and because certain devourers of the people found no crumbs at his table, they have all maligned him. But the real collector of facts know that the said king was a capital fellow in private life, and even very agreeable, and before cutting off the heads of his friends, or punishing them, for he did not spare them, it was necessary that they should have greatly offended him, and his vengeance was always justice. I have only seen in our friend Virgil that this worthy sovereign never made a mistake, but one does not make a habit, and even for this his boon companion Tristan was more to blame than he, the king. This is the circumstance related by the said Virgil, and I suspect he was cracking a joke. I reproduce it because certain people are not familiar with the exquisite work of my perfect compatriot. I abridge it and only give the substance, the details being more ample, of which facts the savants are not ignorant. 121s. Full page image, medium size. Louis XI had given the Abbey of Turpin, mentioned in Imperia, to a gentleman who, enjoying the revenue, had called himself Monsieur de Turpin. It happened that the king being at Plessis-les-Tours, the real abbot, who was a monk, came and presented himself before the king, and presented also a petition, remonstrating with him that, canonically and monastically, he was entitled to the abbey, and that the usurping gentleman wronged of his right, and therefore he called upon his majesty to have justice done to him. Nodding his peruke, the king promised to render him contented. This monk, importunate as are all hooded animals, came often at the end of the king's meals, who, bored with the holy water of the convent, called friend Tristan and said to him, Old fellow, there is here a turpin who angers me, rid the world of him for me. Tristan, taking a frock for a monk, or a monk for a frock, came to this gentleman, whom all the court called Monsieur de Turpin, and having accosted him managed to lead him to one side, and taking him by the buttonhole gave him to understand that the king desired he should die. He tried to resist, supplicating to escape, but in no way could he obtain a hearing. He was delicately strangled between the head and shoulders, so that he expired, and, 3 hours afterwards, Tristan told the king that he was discharged. It happened 5 days afterwards, which is the space in which souls come back again, that the monk came into the room where the king was, and when he saw him he was much astonished. Tristan was present. The king called him, and whispered into his ear, "You have not done that which I told you to. Saving your grace, I have done it. Turpin is dead." "Eh? I meant this monk." "I understood the gentleman." "What, is it done then?" "Yes, sire." "Very well then," turning towards the monk, "come here, monk." The monk approached. The king said to him, "Kneel down." The poor monk began to shiver in his shoes. But the king said to him, "Thank God that he has not willed that you should be killed as I had ordered. He who took your estates has been instead. God has done you justice. Go and pray God for me, and don't stir out of your convent." That proves the good-heartedness of Louis XI. He might very well have hanged the monk, the cause of the error. As for the said gentleman, he died in the king's service. In the early days of his sojourn at Plessis-les-Tours, King Louis, not wishing to hold his drinking bouts and give vent to his rakish propensities in his chateau, out of respect to Her Majesty, a kingly delicacy which his successors have not possessed, became enamoured of a lady named Nicole Beaupetais, who was, to tell the truth, wife of a citizen of the town. The husband he sent into Ponant, and put the said Nicole in a house near Chardoret, in that part which is the Rue Quincamron, because it was a lonely place, far from other habitations. The husband and the wife were thus both in his service, and he had by La Beaupetais a daughter, who died a nun. This Nicole had a tongue as sharp as a popinjay's, was of stately proportions, furnished with large beautiful cushions of nature, firm to the touch, white as the wings of an angel, and known for the rest to be fertile in peripatetic ways, which brought it to pass that never with her was the same thing encountered twice in love, so deeply had she studied the sweet solutions of the science, the manners of accommodating the olives of Poissy, the expansions of the nerves, and hidden doctrines of the breviary, the which much delighted the king. And she was as gay as a lark, always laughing and singing, and never made anyone miserable, which is the characteristic of women of this open and free nature, who have always an occupation, an equivocal one if you like. The king often went with the hail-fellows his friends to the lady's house, and in order not to be seen always went at night time, and without his suite. But being always distrustful, and fearing some snare, he gave to Nicole all the most savage dogs he had in his kennels, beggars that would eat a man without saying by your leave, the which royal dogs knew only Nicole and the king. When the sire came, Nicole let them loose in the garden, and the door of the house being sufficiently barred and closely shut, the king put the keys in his pocket, and in perfect security gave himself up, with his satellites, to every kind of pleasure, fearing no betrayal, jumping about at will, playing tricks, and getting up good games. Upon these occasions friend Tristan watched the neighbourhood, and anyone who had taken a walk on the mall of Chardoret would be rather quickly placed in a position in which it would have been easy to give the passers-by a benediction with his feet, unless he had the king's pass, since often would Louis send out in search of lasses for his friends, or people to entertain him with the amusements suggested by Nicole or the guests. people of Tours were there for these little amusements, to whom he gently recommended silence, so that no one knew of these pastimes until after his death. The farce of Balzac was, it is said, invented by the said sire. I will relate it, although it is not the subject of this tale, because it shows the natural comicality and humour of this merry monarch. They were at Tours 3 well-known misers. The first was Master Cornelius, who is sufficiently well known. The second was called Beccard, and sold the gilt work, coloured papers, and jewels used in churches. The third was Hight Marchand, and was a very wealthy vine-grower. These two men of Touraine were the founders of good families, notwithstanding their sordidness. One evening that the king was with Beaupetais, in a good humour, having drunk heartily, joked heartily, and offered early in the evening his prayer in Madame's oratory, he said to la dame his crony, to the Cardinal, La Balue, and Droll Stories, who was still soaking, "Let us have a good laugh. I think it will be a good joke to see misers before a bag of gold without being able to touch it. Hi, there." Hearing which, appeared one of his valets. "Go," said he, "seek my treasurer, and let him bring hither 6,000 gold crowns, and at once. And you will go and seize the bodies of my friend Cornelius, of the jeweller of the Rue des Satans, and of old Marchand, and bring them here, by order of the king." Then he began to drink again, and to judiciously wrangle as to which was the better, a woman with a gamey odour, or a woman who soaped herself well all over, a thin one or a stout one. And as the company comprised the flower of wisdom, it was decided that the best was the one a man had all to himself like a plate of warm mussels, at that precise moment when God sent him a good idea to communicate to her. The cardinal asked which was the most precious thing to a lady, the first or the last kiss? To which La Beaupetais replied, that it was the last, seeing that she knew then what she was losing, while at the first she did not know what she would gain. During these sayings, and others which have most unfortunately been lost, came the 6,000 gold crowns, which were worth all 300,000 francs of today. So much do we go on decreasing in value every day. The king ordered the crowns to be arranged upon a table, and well lighted up, so that they shone like the eyes of the company, which lit up involuntarily, and made them laugh in spite of themselves. They did not wait long for the three misers, whom the valet led in, pale and panting, except Cornelius, who knew the king's strange freaks. "Now then, my friends," said Louis to them, "have a good look at the crowns on the table." And the three townsmen nibbled at them with their eyes. You may reckon that the diamond of La Beaupetais sparkled less than their little minnows. "These are yours," added the king. Thereupon they ceased to admire the crowns to look at each other, and the guests